Welcome everybody to MogTalk episode 150. Today is Saturday. It is October 27th, just a few days before Halloween. And it's been a long time, guys. It's been a long time. I haven't had a show in a while, but I figured we'd have a pretty awesome show. So I brought on two of my favorite guests. Layla, who's been on the show multiple times. I don't know what the count is now, but it's a lot. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I'm not keeping score.
No?
I'm doing well. Always fun to come and shoot the shit with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, should be fun today.
All right. You mind doing a quick rundown of who you are so people have an idea who's talking?
Sure. I'm Layla Bell from the video game Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, later known as Heavensward and Stormblood. I've been raiding in the game since 2.0. I've been part of the hardcore raid scene for probably 3 to 4 years. I raided together with my friends in Elysium for many years, and we had a lot of success and fun doing that. And eventually that led me to this beautiful man, Frosty.
Oh, sweetheart. Oh, well, thank you for coming on, dude. We also have another person who is, the second on the list, but not second in my heart at all. Mr. Choy, one of my favorite guests to come on because he's always insightful. Dude, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, how's it going? Pretty good.
Yeah. So, just so everybody knows who you are as well, you mind doing a quick intro for yourself?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV since A Realm Reborn. Been raiding since. I never got into like the whole world raiding thing or the world race or anything like that. So I don't have any relevant accomplishments under my belt. And I'm not sure why Frosty keeps asking me to come on the show, but I can't say no to him. So here I am.
I appreciate your inability to say no to me. It means a lot.
Dude, I co-signed the Bach for the show.
Yeah, I was like, Layla, who do you want on? Do you want on this jerk or do you want on this jerk? And he was like, I want on that jerk. And so we brought on Bach.
Oh, sweet. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude,
I feel so honored.
Bach fan.
Yeah. Layla is for sure. He says that he looked up to you back in the old days, back in...
So this is a true story. I don't know if I actually told Bach this.
Okay.
But back when I was learning Warrior... I might have told him this on Twitter or something, but back when I was learning Warrior, back in 2.0, Bach was very... basically that. Bach was very active as a warrior.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's fine.
I keep forgetting I don't have a push to talk thing. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll remember now. How loud was
I don't
that?
know what he was doing, dude.
If you have the program up, by the way, if you're looking at Zoom and it's up, you can press, I think it's Alt-A.
Alt-A, yeah, okay. I'm so sorry. Okay, sorry, continue your story.
As I was saying, about to pay him compliments, back in 2.0 when I was learning Warrior, Bach was very active on the forums in regards to Warriors, and I took a lot of insight into stuff that he used to put up there, so big fan of the Bach, dude. He may not know it, but big fan.
Oh, cool. I had no idea.
He's actually one of the reasons why I still have hope in Reddit a lot of the times, because I know that there's, throughout all the glamour posts and Makotes and everything else, there's a Bach post somewhere, and you can read it, and every single time you feel good afterwards. It's like enlightening, But yeah, that's our praise to you, Bach.
Oh wow, such kind words.
Yeah,
I've always admired you guys from afar too. So I don't know if you guys do that, but like, Layla, all your accomplishments and stuff. Like,
bring it in, guys. Bring it in.
I've always looked up.
Group hug, dude.
Oh, it's gonna be so great when we all get together at FanFest and we're all like chumming it up.
I know, right?
Oh wait. Okay. That's enough. Guys, thank you again, everybody here who came to watch us today. I wanted to have a show today. I basically asked out on Twitter. I was like, hey, what would you guys want to see? And we had this brilliant idea. I don't know who said it. Somebody, all right? They said, hey, it'd be great to talk about the evolution of raiding and kind of how it progressed through the tiers and everything else. And
it's Kyoko.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kyoko.
Gyoko. Wonderful guy. Kyoko. Oh, Kyoko.
You've met him.
I've met him in real
He's
life.
been on your show.
No, I just don't. I always call him Kai. I never call him anything else because I'm like, I'm not going to say that's name. But yeah, no, I wanted to have this show so we could kind of talk about that because it brought up a lot of memories, a lot of nostalgia from back in the day. And I was interested in kind of all of our perceptions on how ratings started out and how it kind of got to where we are today. So we'll be doing this whole road trip, going through each tier and kind of talking about what we liked, didn't like, how that kind of affected the raid scene and everything else. And by the way, if you guys haven't seen MogTalk, I guess I forgot to say this. If you guys haven't seen MogTalk and want to know what it is, it's a show based around the Final Fantasy 14 community discussing anything from Savage raiding to Chocobo racing. And funny enough, it's raiding today, so let's get into it.
Did you have a show on Chocobo racing?
Never.
Okay, on the to-do list. Got it.
It's on the to-do list. When they give an update, the next Chocobo racing update, you got a MogTalk on it.
Bring Chi on that show.
I will. I've had him on one show so far. Chia PV. Never mind. I'm not.
You almost broke your rule.
Almost broke it.
We're not even 10 minutes in and you started talking about PvP.
I know, man. I'm just so hyped about FanFest and everything else that's going on, but we'll get into that maybe later. What I want to ask you guys off to start off the whole conversation about raiding. Can you guys just tell me what raid cycles were you part of? When did you get into raiding, and what did you maybe miss out on? What tiers and everything else? Layla, can you go first on that?
Yeah, so I've been here since the slums of Binding Coil, the very first tier in Realm Reborn. And I didn't miss a single tier actually until this most recent tier, Alphascape. So rated from Binding Coil up through Ultimate Weapon.
Okay. There you go, dude. Bach?
I started raiding in Binding Coil as well since the beginning. Did every tier except the one thing I didn't do was Unending Coil. That's the only thing I didn't do.
Unending Coil?
Yeah. When it came out, I wasn't playing the game when it came out, and when I came back to it, I don't know.
That's a huge miss, dude.
I know, that's what everyone keeps telling me, but I watched it and I just have no motivation to do it.
Oh, that was sad.
Maybe eventually, we'll see.
Okay, I mean, you can go in there and do some gimmick with 8-Man Warrior or something like that, right?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I will be very interested in seeing that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you guys both have some experience at the very beginning. I personally didn't really get into raiding until second coil, so I missed the first coil. And when we start talking about first coil and back in Bahamut days and everything else, some people are like, oh, that's the golden age of raiding. But, I mean, the first coil was the first experience we had with a Realm Reborn saying, hey, this is what raiding is going to be like in this game. This is what we can expect. This is what we're going for. Did you guys feel like we're in a pretty good spot in that first coil? Were you guys content with how they did that?
I mean, with the first coil and the first raid tier for Realm Reborn, the game was had just had a major transition, obviously, from 1.0. And nobody really knew what to expect. It was very buggy. The balance was, for lack of a better term, awful. I mean, it was just really bad right out of the gate.
Like job balance, or
yeah, the job balance was
okay.
Very skewed. If you may recall, bards and the lack of there being a second tank. I think that yeah. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say. I mean. Warrior was interesting back in those days, from what I hear. It just wasn't. You're right. It really wasn't a tank. I don't know. Buck feels different.
It was awful. I played Warrior. I played Warrior in 2.0, and it was awful. Like people complain now about like samurai and black mage, and they're just like and non-meta jobs. They're just like, oh man, this job sucks. Like, man, you guys don't know what suck means until you go back in time. You go play 2.0 Warrior. You guys don't know what suck means.
There's a difference between suck and like fundamentally flawed, and like the design is just broken. That's what 2.0 Warrior was.
Not to mention you're like a complete liability to the team just by being there.
Yeah. Then you had classes like Bard and Black Mage that were just like out of the box, way overtuned out of the gate. So I think the first coil was like a real trial and error process for them to sort of figure out, okay, what is raiding going to be like in our new game? How do we want to like develop these balance cycles for jobs? It was really a learning experience for both the dev team and the players.
Mm-hmm. No, I can see that. I mean, like, it more felt like, hey, we're getting into this, and now we're all trying to figure out this game. The developers are trying to figure out how they need to balance it and how we need to make the game work. So maybe it wasn't like, I don't know, the first like major, hey, we're going into this and this is a serious raid. This is more just, hey, let's figure out how we can make this work. Was that more along the lines of it, or I don't know? It was just a testing raid.
I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't a test in their eyes. They're obviously trying to put together a good product, but I think that they had a learning curve just as much as the players did for their new game. That's really all I would say about it.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm guessing you guys both were part of the double paladin meta back then for doing.
Yep.
The clears.
I rolled Warrior originally because that's the job I wanted to play.
Yeah.
And then we cleared turn 1, and I was just like, I don't want to do this to our healers anymore. Warrior sucks. Warrior sucks balls. So then I went and hit up what's it? Eastern Thanalan? What's that? What's that fate people used to do?
In Eastern Thanalan?
Was it Eastern or no? Sorry, not Thanalan. God, the one with the lambs that you weren't supposed to kill, and you just farmed the shit out of the acolytes or whatever.
Oh,
Northern Thanalan?
Dark Devices.
Yeah, that. So I did that on Paladin until I hit level 50, and then started raiding on Paladin, and it was just like so much better.
So, all right. So we've come a long way, at least from that, right? We're not dealing with that kind of job balance. The job balance now is like, hey, we don't do enough damage, and that's really the issue, right? We can still clear the content, we can do everything fine. It's just we want to clear things faster. So it's kind of a different.
Yeah, it's more in line with that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's perfectly that, but it's more in line with that. Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about job balance there. What about gear in general? Like back in that first coil, I wasn't there. Was there a lot of? I know the primals existed. Did you have to go through all the primals to gear progression going into raiding and everything? How does that compare to where we are now?
Well, gear. The process of gearing is not really a part of the equation anymore. Mm-hmm. When you're comparing it to like how it was back then versus how it is now, I mean, It's night and day. Binding coil, I think we're still in the scope of binding coil. Like Binding coil specifically had a different barrier of entry of you had to, like you said, progress through the primals to actually unlock the raid, which meant a natural progression of getting your I think it was your level 80 relic weapon. I actually don't remember how you unlocked the I level 90 version, but I know that you got the I level 81. How did you get the I level 91? I can't remember. But you sort of did that relic progression by just doing the primals, and then the people who were like racing out of the gate sort of skipped this next step in the process. But most people then went on like farm Darklight gear in the 4-man dungeons, and then they took that into the raid. Whereas nowadays, it's typically all crafted gear. You're not doing much farming at all. You're sort of just buying your gear and then zoning it with that gear, and then well, even these days, the concept of gear progression mid-prog is removed. So that was also very different back then. Tiers typically lasted a bit longer back then.
Mm-hmm.
Why that is debate can probably take up a whole nother show.
Right.
But tiers lasted longer back then, so you had multiple weeks of loot lockouts, and the process of gearing up mid-prog was much more exercise than it is, say, like today, where teams are clearing tiers in week 1.
Do you guys kind of miss that at all? Bach, do you miss that at all?
Not really, not particularly. To be honest, I've never been really a gear-driven person. The gear is just for the stats. See, I don't know. I guess there are two different types of raiders. There are raiders who raid as a means to get items, and then there are players who get items as a means to raid. Right? It's like, oh yeah, if I have these items, I can hit harder and we can kill this boss easier, or something. But in any case, do I miss it back then? I like how it is now. Honestly, I like how it is now. I mean, just make sure you're well funded.
Mm-hmm.
You go into the next tier, and you buy crafted gear. You find your favorite crafter, that you already have set up and lined up and everything. And then they can hook you up with the gear. You tip them handsomely, of course, and then you go in and you kill bosses. I mean, like, I don't know. I some people don't like the fact that you can just like buy crafted gear and just like smash content, but like, I don't know. I think it's fine.
Okay. Layla, are you kind of on the same board with that? Do you like how the gear turned into kind of just to buy the gear day one, or like within the first hour or two, get it made and be done?
I have mixed feelings. I think that I'll argue against it first. One thing that like the sort of homogenization of gear progression has caused, or actually has lost us, is and this sort of only affects kind of the 1%, but the concept of how you ration your gear in the middle of your prog cycle was a practice that a lot of groups had to be good at back in the day, and it was exercised a lot better than in some groups than others. And I think that that's sort of like, I don't want to say a skill because it's not really a skill, but that's a part of the process that we've lost. Is sort of that gear management. Do we want to gear up the healers first to increase their HP for a mechanic, or do we want to gear up our DPS to make DPS checks to skip mechanics? That's sort of like something that's never in the equation really anymore, just because there's so few amounts of gear upgrades you get mid-prog now. You really only get those upgrades from the first 3 bosses, and that's it. There's no tome
clearing
management.
week 1, right?
Yeah, you're clearing week 1, so there's no tome management, and that's really what I'm getting at. Is the process of like managing your tomes mid-prog. And I don't think that's a big loss, but it's definitely one that I would highlight. I think the other half of me will argue in favor of what we have now because, as like a hardcore player, it's very annoying when you have really bad loot RNG over multiple weeks. And I know that people who rated hardcore in this game back in vanilla and even parts of Heavensward, it was very annoying when you would like go through a tier and you would get nothing but fending drops, or you would get nothing but fending and healing drops, and your DPS would just be sitting there 10 eye levels lower than your competition. That was a reality that happened. That was a reality that happened, and Absolutely. It was very annoying for some teams. And I think when you factor that in, like what we have now of just buying crafted gear and everyone's on an equal footing and equal playing field, and also the fact that the tiers get cleared in 1 week, you remove that RNG element from it. So for for the idea of like racing in prog, it's probably better.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in the world race, in those kind of scenes and everything else, but when you're going into just kind of generic raiding and everything, it's you lose a lot of content, I guess, is kind of what's weird to me. Like if you're looking at like a casual or midcore, you're only raiding a couple days that week, and you want to do things that progress your character and everything else, but all you do is make money and gil to buy gear or have a friend who can make the gear for you. And then you sit there and wait for the RNG on materia to get melded into your gear. And then you go forward. So it feels And that's the only thing that I would have against that, is that there's just not a lot there for people who want to have something to progress themselves outside of raid that aren't raiding super hardcore.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. No. I think there should always be like a sideline line of progression that people can be doing that isn't Eureka. But anyway.
I mean, it's normal, right? Normal mode, you do that, but that's eliminated with crafted gear.
Yeah. You know, that's actually a good point. I mean, like the progression for every tier is the same. It's like you have the crafted level, mm-hmm. right? Which is the same level as the normal mode. So normal mode, crafted, that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have 10 levels above that is your tome stuff, non-upgraded. And then the stuff after that is either upgraded tome stuff or raid drops, right? Mm-hmm. And then, so basically there are only 3 levels, right?
Right.
And for a lot of raiders, they like the week 1, the people clearing on week 1, they're getting, they're basically sometimes skipping that step, going straight from 380 to 400, right? Mm-hmm. So just the fact that there's only like 3 layers and 3 levels of loot is kind of weak, I think.
I mean, I don't know. It just feels weird. I feel like we put a lot of stuff into the game, and this is kind of going on this huge tangent away from binding coil. But I feel like we put a lot of stuff in this game that doesn't really do much for people who want to raid. It's more of doing stuff for people who want to be in the world of Final Fantasy and run around and have different cosmetics and everything else and different parts of an MMO, but it's not really a lot for raiding. We have Final Fantasy's turning into a pretty big, huge world where you can do lots of different things and mess around and do a whole bunch of stuff. But I feel like some things that people come to MMOs for, which mostly has been raiding, is kind of starting to lose a little bit because of it. But I'm not the same developers doing the same thing, everything else. There's lots of debates towards that, but I definitely do feel like Final Fantasy XIV is more of a casual MMO as it's coming down to.
I think if you want to get it back into the scope of binding coil, like the big takeaway would be that back in those days of like, new frontier, everything's kind of unknown. Mm-hmm. There was a much longer gear progression than we currently have now. Mm-hmm. It was expanded over more weeks than it is now. And it was a lot of it was gated by tomes, and some of it was gated by dungeon farming. Yeah.
And I remember, I guess this goes into like overall bahamut, like the relic steps that you had to go through for the whole binding coil, the whole bahamut process was pretty intense. It was like, do as much of this content as possible to become as strong as possible, right? Mm. And it was content maybe you didn't want to do, or you wouldn't do it unless if you had to do it. And that was kind of a neat concept. I mean, they're kind of doing that with Eureka, but they're building this whole new world that you kind of have to go into, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of people maybe aren't that interested in. But anyways, Eureka, all that stuff. Let's get back to binding, and let's talk about that a little bit more. As we moved on into the second tier of binding coil, the second coil, where you start fighting Nail, you start fighting so many like bosses that would bring up like nostalgia for any raider that was around during that time. Definitely for me. Some
people, my rose-tinted glasses right here, man.
Yeah. Some people would consider it one of the best tiers that they came out with in the game. I mean, would you
second
guys?
Coil?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I had good memories in there.
I don't know anyone that had really bad memories with it. It felt good. And another interesting thing about that tier is that a lot of the bosses in that tier, those are like original bosses. Well, I don't know. Maybe they kind of exist sort of somewhere in the Final Fantasy world or Final Fantasy universe overall, but they felt like unique to Final Fantasy XIV, right?
I think they were. I think, you had Rafflesia, which was literally just a plant.
Yeah.
You had Melusine, who was some snake thing that came out of a tube in that Allegan facility.
Yeah.
And then you had Avatar, which I think is just a defense system or something. Mm-hmm. And you had Nail, and obviously Nail's backstory was a product of 1.0.
It was huge too. I mean, it meant a lot to fight Nail. It felt good because it felt like you're doing something in this world that was important. And you kind of felt attached to it because, I mean, you can never bring that back because there's so much history in 1.0 that led to this raid tier, and I don't think there's any way you could kind of bring that back into a new tier here. It's kind of like, you know, if I was going to compare it to WoW and Wrath of the Lich King, I mean, once you passed Wrath of the Lich King, it's all stuff that we're not as passionate about. It's stuff we're making new issues to get us involved into the game.
It's a really good comparison, actually, yeah.
That's exactly how I saw it, and it. I felt like after that it was really hard. It's just going to be hard to match up to for the rest of Final Fantasy XIV's days. Maybe they'll be able to do it. I mean, they probably can. They start bringing in the Garleans and stuff, but I don't know if they'll bring that into the raid scene as much because they've been kind of splintering off the story from it a little bit. But if we go back to second coil and going into that, the gear progression was pretty much, I don't know if it was the same. They didn't really change it up much, right?
Let me think about that. Dungeon farming was obviously less of a necessity because we were all leaving binding. We were entering second coil with binding coil this, and we were all like full eye level 90. I think one thing that they did, and we didn't really talk about this. Bach may be able to remember this better than I can, but I believe that Twintania's weapons, when they first released, sorry to backtrack, but I think when Twintania's weapons, when they first released, I think that they were eye level
90.
90?
The same as your relic. And
it was the same as your relic, right? And then they later upgraded them to 95, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
So that was like the first introduction of them adding higher eye level weapons to the final boss. And I thought that was pretty important because it gave a big purpose to raiding. Like that's actually a big thing that we probably should highlight going forward. It actually gave raiding like a really big purpose because otherwise, if you think about it, let's be honest, secondary stats are pretty abysmal in this game, and you know, compared to other MMOs, and you could theoretically be a full Tombstone player back then and do comparable damage to a player who was min-maxing their gear with both Tombstone gear and raid gear. So the fact that somebody could just get their relic, which was pretty easy to obtain, not kill Twintania ever, your character is basically, for all intents and purposes, as good as somebody who was raiding. So when they upgraded the weapon eye levels, and I think most weapons got +1 weapon damage, but I can't remember. I think there was maybe one or two that didn't, but I think it was fair to say that most people wanted to be using Twintania weapons over their relics, and like that gave a really big purpose to raiding. So like fast forward now to second coil, also that's fold by the way.
Yeah.
Fast forward now to second coil, where you have sort of dungeons being less important because we're all entering with full eye level 90 to 95 gear. The big thing that changed in second coil was we had, I'm trying to remember. I know that we had tombstones like in the raid itself. And I believe we had oils and sands. Am I correct with that?
That came up. That came out in second coil. That became a thing in
second coil. Yeah. We had oils and sands. So that was like a very big change, I would say. If you're looking for like a very big change in Realm Reborn, I think the introduction of the oils and sands furthered the purpose of raiding. Like you had Twintania sort of paving the way for raiding being a big deal, and now you had oils and sands, basically solidifying the fact that if you're not raiding, you're not going to be as high eye level as somebody who is. Yeah,
exactly.
That was a very big deal, I think.
It's a big deal, and people are all up in arms about it. But whatever. Did you want to just talk about like gear and how it progressed from the beginning till now, or did you want to just go tier by tier?
I was gonna. I mean, however you want to talk about whatever. If it's on your mind and you want to talk about it, just hit it. Don't hold back.
Okay. All right. So. A lot of things changed with itemization in this game, and a lot of things stayed the same. Things that changed. Do you remember accuracy back then?
Yes.
Accuracy cap. You had to find out what each boss's accuracy minimum was.
Yep.
And then so then you had to basically parse it, and then I recorded a miss at 557 accuracy. So the accuracy cap must be 558 or higher, right?
Yeah.
And then, so here's the problem. Here's the problem. You can easily make a best in slot list with the perfect amount of accuracy. Perfect amount of accuracy. But as you're working your way there, what if all the drops that you got just had no accuracy on it?
Yep.
So sometimes you had to wear a shittier piece that had accuracy on it just so you can actually hit the boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't want to miss that important like, you know, Skull Thunder on the
This
newly
happens
spawned
so
dragon,
much more like
right?
people might expect.
Yeah.
It was so, or either that or you're like 400 points above the accuracy cap, and you just feel stupid. It's like you need 550 accuracy and you have like 700 or something.
Mm-hmm.
You could do like open heart surgery with overpower spam. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was another thing that I think gave importance to rating. The concept of accuracy caps. Like a lot of times you would have tome gear released that maybe didn't have any accuracy at all. So like a player that isn't rating, I mean, I guess their accuracy caps are going to be lower because the primals typically had lower accuracy caps. But in order to like get your accuracy to a stable point, a lot of it required raid gear, or conversely, sometimes it required tome gear, and that was a lot of fun. You know, being gated by accuracy on your tome gear.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it was just a very annoying dynamic between the two ways of gear progression, and I don't know if this is a topic for later in the show, but I for one am glad accuracy is gone.
Okay. The other stat we don't see anymore is parry. I'm glad that's gone too.
Parry was something that could have been so much better, and they just completely missed on it.
It could have been like randomly occurring avoidance in this game is worthless. It's so worthless.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Okay, back in coil, like binding coil, second coil, even up to like final coil, right? Tanks were told to go all vit, all parry. And best in slot was whatever gave you the most parry, right? No. Oh, and people on the internet were like, you know, if you ever said anything differently, they call you stupid. They say, oh, don't listen to this guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about, right? But like, just thinking about it, I'm just like, doesn't parry kind of suck?
Yeah.
Doesn't a parry kind of suck? And I don't know. And on top of that is like going full strength. And then wearing crafted accessories, like people, like such a small percentage of tanks back then did that. You know, you wore strength accessories and you melded vit into them, right? It was incredible because like a tank would do like insane amounts of damage, right?
Yeah.
And back then, people didn't know about stuff like this, and I guess to compare back then to now, people are just smarter now. Like you could just take before the servers are even up, all the stats on all the gears data mined, and then you just plug them into some like spreadsheet, and it tells you what your best in slot is. It's like that's possible now. You know, back then, like nobody knew anything, right? Everybody was completely ignorant to things like crafted accessories and why parry's not good. And why, you know, when is crit better than det? People didn't know about that, but now everybody knows everything. Like best in slot lists already determined before the servers are even up.
Yeah. All right, Buck. Do you remember what you were saying at all in any regard?
Yeah, we're talking about how items and secondary stats and stuff were back in the Stone Ages. And how they kind of evolved to what we had now.
And we're bashing parry, right? That was the big thing.
Yeah. Specifically, what we were talking about is how players in general got smarter, and you know, the community, you know, they just know more about the game, and they also, you know, through social networking, you know. The people who can find stuff like this out, you know, they can easily get in contact with each other and stuff and share information. So I don't know. I think people in general are smarter. That's a huge change.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we developed logic to a lot of this stuff. We started actually investigating these stats, and we weren't just survivability 100%. We were, all right, what's actually practical? How does this stat work? If we go into an ideal situation where people are healing and, they don't care how much damage you're taking, they're expecting the worst case scenario, and so they're planning for that. It makes these little things, like little bits of damage that come to you, it means nothing. You plan for the hits that will actually change and matter later on. But good.
So as far as things that have changed though, they got rid of accuracy, replace it with direct hit. They got rid of parry, replace it with tenacity. And at various points, they changed the way crafted accessories work because they're OP as fuck on tank.
Right.
Sometimes the tank would basically just get the striking or slaying accessory and meld it into it or something like that.
Right.
What else? They let you meld at some point.
To kind of talk about too, when we were going back to like Bahamut days and everything else, they didn't really have a big use for materia back then, right? That wasn't even put into gear. So even if you wanted to try to say, all right, well, I need it to hit this accuracy cap, you couldn't augment your gear to make up for
that.
Yeah,
you couldn't even do that.
Which
there
I think,
was
go ahead.
Sorry to interject.
No.
There was a sort of a how do I want to put it? Like a revolution towards the end of second coil, I would say, for healers, where healers actually started wearing crafted very low eye level crafted gear just for the sake of putting accuracy in it. And I know that Goka's in the chat right now, and I will give Goka the proper shout out he deserves for this. Goka was a large pioneer for this playstyle, at least on Gilgamesh, of sacking eye levels of mind and piety and stuff for lower eye levels of accuracy, and it really started to, I think, pave the way for what the playstyle of healers later became in later tiers. So while the other jobs weren't really messing around with melding, I think maybe there was maybe one outlier of like a bard belt or something in second coil or final coil, I can't remember.
Right.
But it was really only healers that were experimenting with melding back then until final coil, which we can segue there too after.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also, I guess that was the concept of maybe people realizing, hey, I know how much I need to heal. What can I sacrifice in order to make sure I do damage at the same time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that wasn't a train of thought until,
we really only saw it with healers, though, in second coil.
Yeah. I mean, and that continued accuracy for healers continued for a while through Alexander, too. It wasn't even something, I mean, once that started, it was important for all healers to do as much damage as they could, and I think that's the first raid of Alexander, so we're kind of skipping into that a little bit, but you were expected to do a certain amount of damage as you healed at the same time.
I think it was just one big turning point for that you can mark in the game's history of where people were learning how to be good at the game, and when during that second coil stint of time, healers started to learn I should be doing damage with these globals. I shouldn't just be sitting here. Maybe during progression that train of thought was a little bit lessened because MP management was much different back then. It was a much bigger deal. So healers AFKing on globals was much more common back then during progression. But during farm, spending every excess global that you can on DPS was optimal. And should have been encouraged. And the only way you could do that back then was by melding accuracy. Otherwise, none of your spells landed except for your dots.
Right. So I kind of forget, and you might have to just forgive me on this. Was second coil Savage before or after the final coil?
Second coil Savage was before final coil, after second coil. It was in between. It was 2.3.
Okay. And so that was one of the first introductions of people saying, hey, we're going to go out there and do, I guess, do the content as the most difficult content that they could put out there. And I mean, it was pretty challenging, but it wasn't challenging in the order we thought it would be, because they were just wanting to give us unreleased fights that they said, hey, this would be too hard. I didn't want to actually subject you guys to this, but you're bored. Here you go. And you guys love that though, right?
I'll let Bach start.
Okay.
Did we lose him?
Buck, you still there?
Sorry.
Hello?
Actually, let's ask Fold. Fold.
Sorry, I'm
Fold.
back. Yeah.
What's your opinion
We
on
have
this?
against appearance.
Hey, boys. Hey, boys and girls.
Oh, hey, what's up, Fold?
So here's the story.
Okay.
Here's the story.
Fold, we were just talking about. Your perfect time for you to come in, by the way. We have just segued into Second Coil Savage.
Oh, my favorite.
And Frosty was curious about our general thoughts about Second Coil Savage, if you liked it or didn't like it.
So I'll tell you, T6. T6 was a good fight. I feel.
T6
Awesome
Savage.
fight. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, it had mechanics that had you hold DPS. Like it was very coordinated in when to kill ads and timing it with the AoEs of the boss. It was a really cool fight. T7. I could tell you, Coldy hated T7. Do you remember Coldy and T7?
Yeah, Bards didn't care for turn 7 as much as every other class did, but
I wonder why.
I hated 7. I was a tank. I hated 7. 7 was stupid. It was like basically 4 people doing turn 7 Savage, while the tanks and melee were doing turn 7 normal.
yeah, that's accurate.
And I know, I'm going to entertain myself by trying to do as much damage as possible. Whoa, hold on, you can't do that either, because if you push DPS at the wrong time, then the boss phases and he starts his new rotation, and sometimes that'll wipe you, right? Because if you don't get the shriek at the proper time, then you can't beat it, right?
Mhm.
So basically, it was just a miserable experience for the people who didn't have to do any Savage mechanics.
So it was miserable, but at the same time, it also was the first fight that sort of really stressed your coordination and your timing between your team. Because you think
Right.
about it, and we used to always meme back in the day about like what the achievement name was called seconds, right? When you beat Melusine Savage, the achievement you get is called seconds, and it's we used to joke, or maybe not joke, it might have been true, that the reason the achievement's named seconds is you literally have like very few amount of seconds. You have just like a 6-second window to do the mechanics properly.
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, things don't line up. And I maybe they designed it with that in mind. I am inclined to believe they did. I think that like when because Second Coil Savage was their first time doing this, right? It was their first time making a difficulty that was different than normal mode, which is like a very big deal.
Yes.
And they were clearly experimenting with things, and I thought that each fight had its own flavor and something they were experimenting with, and they experimented with timings and coordination on Melusine to a level that we really, I'll be honest, we don't see that level of timing requirement anymore.
Really?
These days.
Not even like Ultimate?
I don't think so. Like push timing was very, very, very strict on that boss. I'm not saying the fight was more difficult than say like a Yukab or an Ultima Weapon.
Right, of course.
But just in terms of like the stress that you had in timing your percentage-based pushes, we've never had a fight as much as it was stressed in that.
You just get arbitrarily shit on by pushing DPS at the wrong time. So you have like these windows that is like, okay, we have to push in between these mechanics, right?
Like you had to hold DPS a lot.
Yeah, you have to hold DPS a lot. Yeah.
You know why it's like that, right? Because the way T7's designed is it has a static Renaud spawn timer.
Yeah.
And it has also static push timing. So I remember I think it was like 65%. You would get the 4 archer ads.
Yeah, something like that.
This would be in conjunction with her normal rotation. So it was the first fight that they actually designed where it had a static timer of rotations or of abilities on top of like percent phase pushing.
Right.
And that's why
it was like layered on top of each other. Yeah. 2 different variables.
Yeah, interacting with each other. And then I think you would phase her by percentage, and then you would have things like ads spawn, and then those ads have their own mechanics that are time based. So now you've added a third variable into the equation. I want to use the pro sector as an example. You know, choosing when you spawn the pro sector adds the pro sector's timers into Melusines timers on top of this static Renaud spawning timer. So it's like we've never had three interactions of timers from three sources interacting like that before that fight, and I really don't feel like we've had it after that fight either.
I don't even think we've had like two layers or two different variables, and fight had multiple.
Is that something you guys cringe to think that it existed, or you're like, that was actually an
doesn't
interesting...
work, man.
Okay.
It's too annoying.
It works if you... I mean, I guess you could just say it works if you're a masochist, but if what they're trying to do is design arbitrary difficulty, that is for sure how you do it. That's a way that you make a fight difficult without putting like a DPS wall. I think the problem is I think what Bach's getting at with it being annoying is that it wasn't fun.
Yeah,
I think
it's not fun.
It's not fun to like sit there with your weapon sheathed for 10 seconds.
Right.
Yeah.
It's challenging and it's difficult to figure out those timings, but it's not fun. And people don't want to play that way is the problem.
I could tell you, especially from a melee perspective, every job has a different role, and the melee role in that fight is particularly boring. You literally just sit on the boss, maybe switch off to some ads, but you look behind you and it's a whole new world. You don't know what's going on.
Do you remember what Chia said about turn 7-fold?
Yeah.
On his monk? I thought that was the best description I've ever heard of anybody.
Behind him, and it was like a whole new fight.
He said, playing a monk on turn 7 is you're doing your fight, and you look behind you, and people are doing an entirely different fight.
Yes. Your roles are so isolated from each other, and I think that fight is the biggest discrepancy between difficulty levels depending on what job you're playing, what role you're playing, right? If you're tank or melee, it's like Snorefest, right?
Yeah.
But then if you're kiter or if you're the healer who has to shoot the Renauds with your, it's difficult, right?
Yeah. I mean,
there was a very big like lopside in terms of responsibility balance.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, like, this stuff was was it interesting to at least figure out when you guys are going through this fight and try to execute for the first time and it was annoying later on? Or was it more just, no, this is just stupid. I hate this. This is clearly broken. I'm glad they didn't put it in there.
It's just stupid. I think it's just stupid.
Okay.
I think when the boss just gives you an arbitrary fuck you for pushing, their life, the HP percentage at a very specific point in their rotation, like that's not the only fight that did it, but that was the worst offender. Like turn 7 normal did that. It happened in final coil. It happened with Ramu. Like
Right.
it was so stupid. Basically, you just arbitrarily wipe just because you pushed percent at a specific time.
Like you're doing too well.
I'll tell you why it didn't work in the long run. Because I think whether or not you liked it is probably subjective. My personal feeling is that I liked it as one fight of the tier. I felt my personal feeling back then was like I wanted at least one fight that was very mechanically intensive per tier. Back then, like the game was a bit simpler, so you sort of had like your DPS wall fights, and then you had your mechanic fights. They very rarely had a fight that was like a DPS oriented fight and a mechanical fight. So I appreciated the fact that turn 7 existed just because it was light on DPS checks, but it forced you to think critically. What I will say, and this is why they gravitated away from it, is a fight like many of their other fights they've designed that punishes you for having good DPS, and you're not going. The longer you go through a tier, it doesn't make you better at the fight. You're always going to be the same. You're always going to be as good as you were at the fight as you were when you started, because unless you can completely lap yourself, you're holding DPS no matter what. And I remember a very specific scenario of we were so sick of having too good of damage on the fight on turn 7 Savage that we literally equipped weapons that were 20 eye levels lower in our inventory just to make the pushes more brain dead. And that was just dumb.
Okay.
I think that it can be done to where you can have fights of that nature that are punishing if you time things poorly. But I don't think it has to be based on like a percentage HP of the boss, because that just punishes you for having good damage.
Right. I mean, coming from this too, I mean, you guys are putting in a lot of thought in how these fights need to be cleared. I mean, the community's advancing too. For example, like you were talking about with the healers trying to change their gear up so they can do damage properly. And I mean, we're coming from this savage mode, then we're going into this new raid tier, which is the final coil. And a lot of people have said multiple times that, you know, that's the downswing. That's when we started to make content a little bit easier before we got into Alexander and everything. And that's why everyone was kind of concerned going into Alexander. But I mean, I kind of feel like coil was a product of the community developing.
Like all iterations of coil, like how it progressed?
Well, kind of how the difficulty overall was for it. I don't know if it was the progression, just more of like, we went into it and it really wasn't a challenge for most of the community, right? Compared to what we had before.
You talking about Final Coil specifically?
Yeah, Final Coil.
I think the Final Coil was in response to, I don't know, maybe I want to hear what Fold thinks about like why Final Coil's difficulty was the way it was. Because I don't really remember it. I'd have to think about it.
Okay.
There's a couple of reasons that would come to mind. So the development team, they've been trying to figure out what they want, because first coil was a mess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second coil, they did a lot better. You know, they got rid of T3, which was T3 was not even like a turn; it was just like a jumping puzzle.
Right.
When they got to final coil, part of me wants to believe they wanted to make it a little more accessible because it was like the pinnacle of the story of the coil storyline.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so having people see, especially when it came to T12, that was really important because it had a special like cutscene with Louis, right? So they wanted people to see that cutscene. So I feel like they wanted it to be accessible. But there was a lot of factors that came into why I think Final Coil was as short as it was. I think Second Coil Savage made players a lot more like better. It really had them pushed to the mechanical limits as far as the game was at that point. Also, healer DPS was definitely a big thing in Final Coil.
Yeah, that's something that we should probably highlight. Like when they were designing encounters back then, and I actually don't know how they've been doing it in Stormblood because I haven't kept up. But back then, when they were designing and tuning encounters, they tuned them with 0 healer DPS in mind, like actual 0. And they would tune them with tanks in full fending doing aggro combos. And that was it. So when you have a team that's incorporating healer DPS into their mix, which I think started the game track in Second Coil and became much more popular for the teams that were successful in Second Coil Savage. For those teams that were then taking that healer DPS into Final Coil, we were just obliterating DPS checks that Square Enix wasn't prepared for us to obliterate. They were anticipating that we would need more gear, when in reality, no, you just need to press your buttons better. That was like a big oversight, I think, by then. I don't know how you can miss the fact that when you give healers abilities, like DPS abilities in their kit, and you don't plan for them at all, I think it's a big oversight by them. I know that the reason they said that they didn't account for healer DPS was they assumed that everyone else was doing perfect play, and then maybe if the healers do 0 DPS, then it'll balance out with a real world scenario of where everyone's not doing perfect play. I think that they underestimated their player base because the game was pretty simple rotationally back then. It was pretty hard to screw up your rotation. You had to kind of go out of your way to try. So the only thing that you could screw up was uptime. And for teams that knew how to get good uptime and do good healer DPS, I mean, those DPS just got obliterated. And that's one of the reasons why it was able to be cleared in the gear level that it was.
I mean, like, it's weird the way I'm trying to remember back then the response the community kind of gave after going through that. I just remember a lot of negative. I don't remember a lot of... I remember some good stuff. They were like, wow, this is cool. I mean, it's a standard, hey, I went through the fight. Oh, I loved it, enjoyed it. Second week, third week, they're like, wow, this is kind of boring. This sucks. Because there was nothing left for Raiders to do, too, after that, because they had to wait till the expansion before another fight came out.
yeah, it was kind of a delicate balance because they got heat from both sides. Okay, like you know how like a big part of the story, like the main story had to do with the coils of Bahamut, right? So back then, a lot of people who were really invested in the story, but not so much invested in raiding. They didn't know how. Maybe they didn't, it was just a world that was kind of beyond their reach. But they wanted to complete the story. And I'm not talking about going on YouTube, right? I'm talking about they wanted to do it on their character. This is important to them. And they never got to do it because endgame raiding is not something that's in their repertoire, right? That's not something they do. Nowadays, like when they in Alexander and Omega, they introduced the normal mode, which is like super easy. Like it's even more accessible. Right. And then the savage modes are the ones for to satisfy the raiders, and it's kind of like a balance between the two because if first of all they removed it from the main story, and it's just kind of like a side story, right? Second of all, you can still experience the story without getting into the savage content, and then if you do savage, then you get some goodies like the really cool cutscene in between the door boss and the main boss, right? Stuff like that. Yeah. So that's changed too.
I mean, it evolved going into Heavensward. There's a lot of evolutions there that they kind of progressed from things that they learned from A Realm Reborn and kind of what the community are like. How am I going to satisfy these different players
specifically?
Yeah. Say that one more time. Sorry, I completely.
Final Coil.
What they learned from Final Coil specifically.
Yeah. And so they learned a lot about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to try to approach it. And we can debate how successful that really was. Going into it, but I think
I'm sure we will.
Yeah, we will. We will. But talking about overall going into A Realm Reborn and how that whole raid cycle worked out, it did exclude a lot of the people who were playing the game because they wanted to play a Final Fantasy MMO. Not because they wanted to play a Final Fantasy MMO and raid. They just wanted to be a part of a Final Fantasy MMO. And so if they didn't have a raid group, they felt like they were kind of excluded on some of the content that was out there. But the raiders, overall, I think most raiders were happy throughout most of A Realm Reborn. Would you guys agree with that or no?
Raiders are never happy. There's always something that something that they always have something to complain about. But
okay.
See,
more satisfied.
A lot of people. Okay, when Final Coil went down the first week, people were shocked, man. People were just like, 1 week? Are you serious? Like how long did second coil did it take for second coil to go down? 3 weeks?
Fold would know better than I would.
2 weeks.
Two. Okay.
TA was the block.
Yeah. But in any case, when Final Coil went down, everyone was shocked at how easy it was, and so people were upset, right? And the funny thing is, when Second Coil Savage came out, just kind of going back to that topic, I think that was ahead of its time too, because it wasn't very popular.
Absolutely.
People didn't do it. Like very few people did it, and there were a few reasons for that. One, I think it was ahead of its time. Like players weren't good enough to do content like that, and didn't understand the game well enough to fully appreciate it, and to for there to be the demand of that level of content. But on top of that, the implementation was so piss poor. Like, what did you get for doing it? You got titles, right? And achievements. It's like, whoop-de-doo, right?
The big problem with it was what they're saying in chat right now. It shared the lockout with.
Yes, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, it shared the lockout. So if you wanted to work on 8, if you wanted to work on Savage 8, you couldn't do 9 for the entire week until the very last day. But what if you still needed gear from it for like your alt jobs, right?
Exactly.
So nobody wanted to do it. It's like, fuck it, let's just get our gear and get the fuck out of here, right?
No.
Yeah, there is a lot of experimenting throughout
Yeah.
A Realm Reborn. I mean, I think they did learn a lot. I think there's a lot of stuff that they did learn. There's stuff in there.
For sure.
If there is something, let's just put it in this summary quickly with Bahamut and that whole tier, final coil, first coil, second coil. Were there things that was there that you wish were still applied to Raid today?
Okay, well, I have an obvious one, I think, that is probably less interesting than others. I felt back then that the raids had a stronger identity. I think thematically and just visually. When you think of the coils, you have various pictures that come to mind, and I think that this persisted a little bit throughout Heavensward as well. I'm really only being critical of Stormblood when I'm talking about this. I don't feel that Stormblood's raids have an identity. I was talking to you about this off air, but
Yeah.
I think that when you take Deltascape, Sigmascape, and Alphascape, it's literally just 12 floors of a battle arena, and every 6 months they add 4 new floors.
Yeah.
There's no identity to the raid, and that came as a cost to them. Basically creating this content that allows for endless cameos from the Final Fantasy universe. There's no identity, so therefore anything goes, and that gives them an endless access to content. And I dislike it personally. I liked it when the raids had identities, when they had themes, and I don't know. I just feel like it's missing today. I don't. When I think of Deltascape and Sigmascape, the only difference is that one had Kefka and one didn't. Like, that's it.
They're just circular arenas where they throw in bosses that are from other Final Fantasy games, and compare that to Coil. I mean, Coil had a huge story that was built up to it. That end of an era cutscene and all that good stuff. Like when you're fighting Bahamut, you're sort of experiencing, like, it's like the penultimate. Like, it's everything is combined into that one moment. When you're fighting Bahamut Prime, and you don't really feel that anymore. You didn't feel it in Alexander. You didn't feel it in Omega.
I think that's by design though. For people like us, that sucks. For people like us, that sucks, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, so many people want to experience that epicness in the story, but again, endgame raid is just out of reach for them. So that's kind of why they had to do it that way.
But see,
right?
I'll argue against that, saying that normal mode provided that access. While it doesn't give you the cool ultimate last fight, really, but it gives you access to that story. You can still feel like you're going through like an environment.
Oh,
you can still feel like you're going through.
But do you? I mean, if the fight's not hard, man, imagine like being that, into the cutscenes, into the story, and then to finish the story, you have to kill this boss. And that's the boss you're spending hours, some days, sometimes weeks, months, figuring out how to kill this boss.
I mean, you're playing
Right?
devil's advocate with yourself right now, Bach. No, it's true. Because this is how I feel as well. People who want to see the story for these raids, right?
Yeah.
Are you really going to feel fulfilled and rewarded when you kill a boss in? And I'm even speaking to the hardcore audience. When you kill a boss in 2 days and you're invested into a raid story, are you going to feel rewarded as, say, you would have if you struggled for 2 weeks straight on that boss, and then you killed it and you were rewarded and fulfilled with access to the story that you've been chasing and working towards, rather than something that was just given to you because you rated X amount of hours?
Exactly.
And I think the game has gone downhill in that regard, and I could go on a big rant about that. So I'm gonna corral myself back in, because my rant actually expels deeper into the fact that you have sort of the cross realm party finder, and the fact that raids have been tuned at a level to where anyone can pug them. I'll corral myself before I get triggered any further.
I really feel normal mode. They're really trying to bring the story experience to literally anyone who plays this game. You know, like if someone finds normal mode really difficult, but they can still clear it, like that's still an accomplishment for them because they got to see the story. You know.
And I think that's kind of the lesser of two evils. They had to do it that way, and it came at a cost to raiders, because that whole experience of to finish the story, you have to beat the biggest baddest boss, right?
Yep.
And that was cool, and it felt good, like, you know, fighting Bahamut, and like you know, when you did Terror Flare for the first time, when you saw Terror Flare for the first time, you're just like, holy shit, you know, like this fight just got real. And then when you finally beat him, I mean, it felt so good. It was like, it's super epic, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think to some extent, if you put that kind of experience out of reach of too many players, they're going to be dissatisfied. And they have, to be honest, like, even though I am of the demographic that you know, doesn't want that to happen, I mean, I think it's the right decision. I mean, you know, you have to satisfy, you know, a higher percentage of people, right?
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, we have to, you know, they have to declare what kind of MMO they're declaring, I guess, for the people who are going to come and play it. And this is a fan service game that brings people in. Is it going to be one that caters towards what do we expect of our players? Should they be, you know, this skilled to see this content? Is that really... I don't know if that's a bad way to see it, because then you say, well, if you're playing this game, you know, this is part of the game. If you want to beat the game, you get better at raiding. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to finish the storyline. You can see it somewhere else. It doesn't block you from seeing this stuff. And if you really...
Fuck that, man. Fuck that. Man, since the dawn of video games, to get to stage 2, you have to beat stage 1. To get to stage 3, you have to beat stage 2. Oh, you're not good enough to beat level 3? Well, I'm sorry, you can't finish the story then. That's how
good.
Video games are since the fucking dawn of time. I'm
completely agreeing with that. Completely.
Yeah.
People
are pussies now. People are pussies now. They're like, I spent money in this game, and I shouldn't be gated behind like your skill check, and I you know,
we're not watching a movie.
That's why, exactly. So I don't know. I don't understand. But whatever. Sorry, your point.
Go ahead, Layla.
Someone was saying something.
You know, in Super Mario 3, how like really early on in the game, you go into the underground map, and you can literally just jump on top of the level and run to the very end, and you get 3 extra portals or three green tubes that like teleport you to later worlds, and you skip. It warps you to like skip 70% of the game. That's what Square Enix gave us with normal modes.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, and when you let's even talk about this going back into Bahamut, and we'll finish that up and go into Alexander here in a second. But with Bahamut, if you couldn't clear something that tier, the next tier came out, gear was easier to access, that tier indirectly got nerfed. You had to wait a little bit longer, but you could still do the content. You could still go back and clear it. It wasn't like you're locked out of it. You just eventually, you got over-geared and the content was easier for you, but you still had to do it to some extent. You couldn't just say, all right, well, let me AFK while watching Netflix to get through this content. What's the point in that? I
think, like, because I know we're basically segueing into Heavensward with like the normal mode versus savage modes here, and everyone will make the argument that normal mode exists because this is what gives casuals access to all the content. I am still going to sit here and argue that even someone playing at a more casual pace, they are going to enjoy and have a better experience playing the game if they have to work for what they are given. Yeah. I cannot possibly imagine the type of gamer that feels fulfillment from having things literally handed to them with no effort required, because that is what a normal mode is. It is zero effort.
Yeah.
And I don't think there are many people playing the game that would do that for a long period of time. And I think that's where I have issue with their like immediacy, their fix to this problem with something that only satisfies the immediate problem.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a long-term solution to that problem in the pathway that they've given us raiders. I think that with the difficulty that was present in Final Coil, if you're a more casual player or raider, I don't think that there's anything wrong with how long it took people to clear Final Coil. Yes, you had to actually use your keyboard and communicate with people on your server and make friendships, and I'm sorry that you had to be social in a massively multiplayer online game.
Block using the keyboard.
Yeah, like I'm sorry that you had to actually be social in this social atmosphere to clear the content, but that's what an MMO is. You know, if you don't enjoy that, then play a single player game. There should be some requirement of,
but I mean, even in a single player game,
playing your character to actually, get access to this content.
Even in single player games, you require some sort of challenge, right? You're like, hey, you have to actually overcome this challenge. You can go into they have easier design modes for it, but that's, I don't know, it just doesn't. You're supposed to put it to where you can kind of, maybe that's not the best experience, best comparison. But no, even the point I'm trying to make is that you still have to work for what you get, and I feel like normal mode's going to a point to where you don't have to work for anything. It's really no work to go in and clear something. You could actually die and still clear it at the beginning of a fight because of how difficult or how easy it is. The other players can just carry you through it.
Yeah. Do you remember when Square Enix announced that they're going to have a normal mode and then a savage mode, and savage mode is going to have like the best gear? Remember how excited the whole
I don't remember the excitement.
Was?
I
Like,
remember
everyone was
being
excited because when they heard the word savage, they were like, it's going to be as hard as second coil savage, and it's going to have the best loot. That's perfect. And then when it was actually released, everyone just like
there are a lot of people that got a reality check.
The normal is like, okay, well, this is definitely not what we expected.
Yeah.
The difficulty scaling was outrageous.
It was outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, let's just like fully transition into Heavensward now.
Yeah. Going into
Gordias normal mode. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The difficulty was it completely missed the bar, right or wrong. I think it completely missed the bar.
Yeah, absolutely. It was not even close to what it should have been.
Did they not advertise it as like normal modes will be comparable to Final Coil?
I don't know if they said that.
I don't know if they said that, but I do know that some people were saying that's kind of expectations. I personally had the expectations of WoW normal mode, where it was going to be very just simple, nothing too crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you guys thought. Did you guys go into it thinking basically this was going to be like going into Final Coil?
I'm trying to remember. I know that we were very surprised with the normal mode that we got in Gordias. I think we were anticipating it was going to take like, I don't know, maybe Fold's memory is better than I do, but I remember expecting it to take like at least a full day.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it, normal Gordias. Yep. And we did it in what, like an hour and a half?
Yeah, something like that. It was like an hour.
And then it's like, okay, AFK 2 weeks while we're waiting for Savage to come out.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody who's going in without a static, they're going to breeze through something like that.
Right.
And that is not what the coils were at all. So right out of the gate, in their first raid tier of Heavensward, not even when Savage hasn't even released yet, we already know that normal mode is a complete joke. Mm-hmm. And it is completely not anything anywhere near what we had in Realm Reborn. So we already know that, okay, well, if they make Savage really difficult, then a lot of people are going to feel alienated because there is a group of people that exist in the middle, and they were not going to be satisfied with what they were given. So that was a big glaring problem, I felt, right out of the gate.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we talk about difficult content and we start talking about Savage version of Gordias, we're talking about a tune that's like really good for it improved the community for sure, but it was also not something that most of the community was ready for, and it caused a lot of groups to just say, hey, I'm just not going to do this. And it's because they were with their friends or they're with other people who are just, they're raiding normally and they made it through Final Coil. They're like, this isn't so bad. Then they get in and they hit A3S and they're like, well, we got to be 100% on top of our game or we can't clear this. And I don't know if that was mostly like the mid-core groups hitting it and then just saying, hey, this isn't this isn't something that we can do as friends. I have to actually get people who can do it, and so that kind of split up a lot of those groups, or at least that's what it seemed to do.
It may not have even have been O3S. It might have been like Faust or A3S. Sorry,
No.
It might have just been the Faust, before they won.
Yeah, I guess true.
That's such a that must have been such a huge reality check to. You breeze through normal, right?
Yeah.
You wait those 2 weeks. You're like, oh, I can't wait for Savage to probably a little bit harder, but how bad could it be? You get the Faust.
You don't even get to see the fight, dude.
Yeah.
He's destroying you.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it stopped people for a while, and that was the first thing they had to do. Was just like, how do I hit a target dummy efficiently?
Yes.
I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't playing the game at the time. Real life aggro. I couldn't. I didn't get Heavensward right away, but I watched streams of it, and not gonna lie, I loved watching Faust Prog streams. It was like my favorite. It was my favorite. It's like these guys just keep throwing themselves at Faust, and hoping to get like incredible crit RNG or something but they keep wiping at the same point like every single time, and it was a wake up call. Not just Faust first and then A3 after, because before that, people were still on the Vit parry train, and always in tank stance and stuff. And like when you can have a 0 death run, learn all the mechanics in A3, right? And still hit and rage when the boss is at like 6%, right? There's another layer of understanding to this game that you're not reaching, that other people who are beating the fight, they're just better at the game. So how do we get that good? And that's when people started to discover, crafted accessories, tanking without tank stance, and so forth.
That was a big thing. I think what Bach just said, I think is very important. You had these DPS walls. And I think the people who were like doing World Prog, I remember I was in a link shell with a couple other groups at the time, or it might have been a Skype group, I can't remember. But I remember them talking about like, oh, mathematically impossible. No, this fight is not clearable week 1. Obviously, the topic has been beat to death. Living Liquid was very clearable week 1, but it wasn't. They didn't change their tune until they saw that 2 other groups actually beat it, and then they realized, huh. I guess we could actually be playing better than we are. So when you have these like really difficult and like fights and encounters, but you know that they're beatable because you're seeing other people beat them, does that not it's both a reality check, and B, does it not make you want to be better?
No, and I think that's what it was.
Is that just a rare type of person that reacts to it that way?
Well, I mean, we're dealing with this community, right? The developers are dealing with a community that are kind of split in how they want to enjoy the game. Some people, they want to just go into it and play a Final Fantasy MMO, and some people are like, holy crap, I can do so much better here. Let me figure out how to clear this. This is something I can achieve. Other people are like, man, I had a long day at work. I only come on so I can kind of have a little bit of fun here, and my group can't figure it out because one person in my group's holding me back, or like I'm holding my group back and they don't realize it, and they just it becomes a depressing situation. And I think that, I don't know if it was a bad thing that the developers saw that happening, but it was happening, right? I mean, and I'm coming from a very casual standpoint. Like my group, once we cleared, and I kind of got carried through A3S back in the day. When we cleared that, it was like, wow, this felt good. We worked really hard on this, and we executed like we should, made a few mistakes, but we still were able to make through this fight. I didn't even give a shit after that. And that was just how a lot of groups felt. They would clear that, and then they wouldn't go on to the next fight because the other tier was already around the corner, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like they would spend all their time doing Living Liquid, and then, the next tier is like 3 weeks away, and you haven't even started Manipulator Prog yet.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into Manipulator. Yeah, and it just didn't feel like it was, I don't know, that it didn't feel like I would want. We saw how difficult Manipulator was, because I mean, it did take a little while to clear, right? It wasn't something that was cleared.
A little while.
A little while to clear.
The DPS check was even higher, I think.
Yeah,
It was
Wasn't
both
it?
a DPS,
The
both
third
a
leg.
DPS check. It was both a DPS check and an HP check.
Yeah.
I actually would probably argue that it was more of an HP check than anything.
Mhm.
But topic for another time.
I agree. Yeah.
and when
Yeah.
your group
but
saw
the
that,
DPS check was nuts. Like oh, sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, when your group saw that after spending so much time into A3, and they were like, "Wow, it took a long time for this fight to be cleared, and we just cleared this." That this is like bonus boss. This isn't a real boss. Why would we try to clear it? It's like a casual group in Ultimate. You know, they would go in there and try it. They may never clear it, but they don't. You know, it's not going to affect them either way.
You know,
So-
people always
go
said that. People always said if you needed Thornton weapons to beat A3, if you needed Thornton weapons to beat A3, you're not beating A4. That's what a lot of people said. Like it's just the DPS check. You're not going to reach it because the DPS check in A4 is that much harder. So when people got Thornton weapons and started beating A3, a lot of them were discouraged and they didn't want to do A4 because it's like, man, if A3 was that hard, we're not beating A4, right?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, a lot of people go back and they'll say, this was a great Savage tier. That was wonderful all the way up. And I mean, people will always say A4S was a cluster because of Nessie. All right, Nessie. That was like the thing that turned a lot of people off from it. And it just felt like you were fighting 4 legs. It didn't feel like you were fighting a boss. So there's a lot of little issues just with that fight in general. But a lot of people will go back to 8.3 and say that this is one of the best fights that they implemented, and they should use this as a standard going forward with all their fights. Do you guys kind of agree with that?
I don't think it was for. Okay, so I'll say it from
Sure.
a melee perspective because I meleeed 04 or A4. I could tell you. So let's go back to T7 Savage for a second.
Sure.
Remember how we said it was basically a fight where melee are doing one thing and they look behind them and it's a whole another fight. It's a whole another universe. Same exact thing in A4. Like for this is the problem I had with the fight was that it was basically a target dummy for melee, and you kind of feel like helpless because the healers are struggling with this really hard mechanic. Tanks are struggling trying to learn these rotations, and all you're doing is hitting a target dummy. You know, you really can't exercise any of your power to just help. You just have to like DPS the legs, and that's why I didn't like the fight for me personally, because it was just a target dummy for melee. But
Yeah.
It's a topic that really grinds my gears, actually. So, because I want to talk down A4 as being a bad fight right now,
Okay.
and I want to talk up A3 as being a good fight.
Okay.
A4. Well, first of all, it's my summation of what I feel about the difficulties of the two. If what they were aiming for was a tier of content that is accessible to all audiences, given that all audiences work for it, you take a boss like Living Liquid and you make Living Liquid the end boss of the tier. I think that's a pretty fair statement to say. I'm not going to complain that he wasn't, but I'm just saying in the mindset of what they were hoping to achieve, Living Liquid's difficulty needs to be the end boss of a tier. The problem with A4 is exactly what Fold just said. There was not an equal sharing of responsibility in the fight amongst roles.
yes.
And this is something that they actually did extremely well in Living Liquid. And it's one of the reasons why it's probably going to go on my Mount Rushmore as best fights they've ever made. And if you think about it, like how did they achieve that? Well, the fact that what are they called? The cascades? Is that what the AoEs are called? I think they were cascades.
Yes. Yeah.
Cascade was
So-
a big one.
Cascade. There were 6 total cascades, and each cascade had a different set of mechanics that go along with it. So, and there were 3 unique sets of cascades. So you'd have Cascade 1, Cascade 2, and Cascade 3. You would have everyone's responsibilities being one thing for those first set of 1, 2, and 3. But then, as soon as Cascade, this is especially important for tanking, as soon as Cascade 4 hit, the roles and responsibilities for your 2 tanks were reversed. And sometimes the roles and responsibilities, depending on RNG, were reversed for your healers as well, depending on what debuffs they got. it's a fight that just through natural progression of the fight, you shared the responsibilities of the mechanics just organically. And everyone at some point during prog or even during a pull had interacted with every ability or every mechanic of that encounter. And that is so not true for like 95% of the encounters they design. Even in everyone's favorite boss from Midas, Brute Justice, like Brute Justice, I'm very critical of actually for not having this. I think the last phase of Brute Justice does a very poor job of sharing responsibility, and we'll get to that when we're talking about Midas. But that is something that they should strive for in like every encounter they design ever.
I totally agree.
And they just missed the mark so much. I know it's a very difficult ask, but who cares? That is what they need to do, because that's what makes a really good fight, and that's what makes a really good prog cycle. And that's what makes everyone also better players.
Well, I think that the disparity between difficulty of certain roles in certain fights is a big deal, and I don't think that they're getting that much better at it. I mean, one fight that I think is a big offender. This is kind of fast forwarding to Stormblood, but 04 Neo X Death. I find a lot of people who enjoy that fight. Some people enjoy it, and some people are like, that fight's boring. And then
I enjoyed half of
it. I thought about it, and I'm just like, it seems that all the healers really love this fight.
Yeah, it's because the healers do everything.
Because and then it's like, and all the DPS think this fight's stupid.
Even
especially in melee, it's like, it's like as melee or as DPS, what do? You don't do any. The only mechanics you do are ones that healers and tanks also have to do. And then sometimes you're exempt from the mechanic, like Grand Cross Delta. You just walk to the front and just stand still and let the healers and tanks do their thing. Grand Cross Omega, healers, it's a complete healer mechanic. So I totally agree. I think that's a huge point. When it comes to whether a fight is fun, it's got to be fun for everybody, and it's got to be equal responsibility, right?
Right.
I think they improved on that in Kefka and Final Omega.
Yeah, and I totally agree too.
Every role is
last two tiers. Yeah,
every role is very active in the fight.
Okay. Well, I mean, kind of, we don't even think about mentioning A2. I don't think they even
That's
like.
actually true.
I mean, A1. I liked A1 as like an intro. I felt like it did
Perfect
a decent
intro to Savage.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. But when you got into like A2, you're like, this is kind of a goofy fight. When you introduce mechanics that completely makes a job, like everything they built up, all the skill they did for their job means almost nothing because they just get into a gobwalker.
Yeah.
It has a weird feeling. I mean, I like the concept of getting into a machine, driving it around, and doing some interesting stuff, but you have to really not care about having to do what you normally do on your job to enjoy it.
Yeah,
right?
Here's what I'll say about A2. I think the strategy, for me, it was very strategy based on whether or not I felt it was a good fight or not, which is kind of funny. I think the strategy of having your healer be in the Godwalker for the majority of the time, with the exception of, I think, like the very last wave, I think that made a really good fight because typically the healer wasn't really doing that much other than healing that fight anyway, outside of, Banes and whatnot. That giving that healer that responsibility is like a cool responsibility for them. And then that left your 4 DPS to actually still focus on maximizing their AoE damage. And also, by the way, maximizing their AoE sustain, which was a big thing that isn't present anymore. The concept of like how to actually sustain your resources.
Yeah.
When the more common strategy occurred of just full timing your 4th DPS in the Godwalker, that to me is when the fight became really dumb. And I know that that was like a prog thing. Anybody doing it in farm, they were always just gonna put their healer in there still. But I would say,
Did that happen in prog?
I mean, I did it as machinist.
It was more common for people progging that fight to put their 4th DPS in the Godwalker than their healers.
We have never put a healer in a Godwalker ever.
Yeah,
it's always been our ninja.
And this is why I think that so many people look back at A2 without like a fond memory, because I look back at it with a very fond memory, because I thought it was a really cool fight, because your 4 DPS were still interacting with the fight, and your healer was given this like new set of responsibilities that are unique to a healer. But most people didn't do that fight. They did the fight where you put your 4th DPS in, and it's an entirely different process, where 1 DPS is literally just not even a factor.
So I have a question. Why would it be okay for a healer to do the mechanic, but if your 4th DPS did it, it's not okay?
So what it does is by taking away the 2nd healer and putting the Godwalker in, it puts a lot of pressure onto that other healer, and his role is now changed, as opposed to say, let me think. Say like you had both healers outside of the Godwalker. You know, the healing dynamic there is very different versus, say, just having the White Mage out with the Scholar Fairy out.
Right.
The Scholar being in the Godwalker, for all intents and purposes, was a full-time job. For what he was assigned to do, it was a full-time job, and that's why I think it was fine. And the 4 DPS there were still interacting with the fight and interacting with their rotations, whereas, say, if you put a Machinist or a Bard in there, you're literally... Your sole purpose in the fight there is doing damage, and you're there to kill the mobs. Your job has not changed. Your role as a DPS, you're still killing the mobs. Whereas the person in the Godwalker, they're there to support everyone else's ability to kill the mobs, which is essentially what the healers were doing back then anyway. The healers were there to support the team. So it's like support being support, DPS being DPS. Whereas if you take the DPS out of the fight and put them into Godwalker, the DPS now becomes a support. And I think that's the mindset of why people don't like it. That's basically my mindset of what I think about it.
No, that makes sense to me. I don't, Buck. Are you still like, eh?
No,
Okay.
it makes sense, but I just feel that the whole concept of the Godwalker was bad.
Well, I mean, they never tried it
I think
again.
even if,
at least to
even
that
if you
extent.
moved it, well, they tried it in limited quantities, like becoming a gorilla for the bombs.
But it's very limited, right? It's not like
It's
the
very
entire
limited.
fight.
You're not in a Godwalker for the entirety of the fight.
Which I do think the gorilla thing was amazing, and I was happy with that.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool.
I mean, it did affect your numbers and everything else. I mean, a good thing that we need to just make sure everyone knows too is when we're getting into Gordias and Midas and everything else, we're also going in line with the introduction of FFLogs and people widely using it, not in beta anymore, coming in, people saying, hey, we're going to start comparing numbers and see who has the biggest E-penis, right? And so that affects a lot of how the community was kind of perceiving and seeing a lot of this content going forward and how they were actually interacting with it, because they wanted to make sure they look good. So when they played with a different group, they're like, oh, look at this guy's FFLogs. I can check him and see if he's cleared this fight. I can check him and see if he looks good, before he even gets in there. And if you check him and he doesn't even have any data there, you're like, do we want this guy in our group? Right? And so it's dealing with this whole like filtering system for players. Like if you weren't, I guess if you weren't like in the game and you haven't cleared content yet and you haven't proven yourself, you kind of got pushed to the side a little bit to go with groups that were going to have a little bit harder of a time as well.
Yeah, I think it created a new avenue for recruitment. You know, like if you're, let's say you're StatX looking for a Bard or something, you know, you're gonna, first thing you're probably gonna do is see like, hey, who's up there on FFLogs, you know, at the time at least, because well, it gets pretty funny mid tier because there's a lot of balance cheesing and stuff going on, but for the most part, it's just another avenue to look for recruitment. From what I see.
And I know I was talking to you, Layla, too, offline, that people already kind of did this before, but that was like very top percentage, right? That was like
Well, it was a
top
very
players.
small portion
Yeah.
of the overall rating community. Like I'm specifically going to highlight Gilgamesh and Leviathan as being like the only 2 servers that really properly tracked people's DPS through spreadsheets. This was like predating FFLogs. Maybe other servers did it, but those were the 2 that were most popular, I think.
Bach, were you on Sargatanas at the time? Did they have like a sheet?
Nope, we didn't have it. We didn't have a sheet or anything. No.
Yeah, we had. There was the DNT EPing leaderboards for Gilgamesh. I remember that. you would like post your ACT screenshot. It was just it was so like clunky.
That's so ghetto.
It's like back in the day when they were doing like arcade high scores and they were just taking pictures of the screen and sending that into Twin Galaxies.
Exactly.
It's like a piece of paper taped to the side of the cabinet. And a pencil hanging by a string.
Yeah, jeez. Well, I mean, like...
that was literally only made, though, to give people like enjoyment of farm. Because I was in D&T at the time, and I remember the reason that thing was made was it was to incentivize people to want to log in the next Tuesday. And I guess that's sort of like translated into why people enjoyed FFLogs too, right? I guess you know, it makes farm more enjoyable for them.
It's a constant progression. It's something that they can always work towards.
Yeah, I think that I think the problem, and I don't know, a bit of a tangent, but I think the problem later became with just how abusable certain things in the game became, particularly when a lot of RNG got introduced. People started to, I'm not saying that everyone did, but some people that were interested in it prior to that became less interested in it. It just sort of took away some of the interest in it for them.
Right. But let's get into Midas now. Let's push a little bit to that, because people will, again, this is another tier where people are like, you know, Midas was done right. It felt like it had a pretty good balance, and there's a lot less to complain about in Midas. Would you guys kind of agree with that?
Outside of the bugs?
Well, yeah, outside of the bugs, you know, the initial ones.
Well, we are going to talk about the bugs. I'm not going to let Frosty get away without talking about the bugs.
There are bugs, right? But there's bugs in like every, well, maybe not to the extent. I don't know. I felt like the Nissy thing is technically an unfixable bug that was in A4S.
Oh, you're talking about A4?
Yeah.
It wasn't really a bug. It was just a product of how their server handles information.
Right.
I don't think that's something they can just fix.
It was an unintended result.
I would say it's unintended, yeah.
Yeah. But then they had a good handful of bugs in Midas, but they went back and I think they fixed them, except for the one in the water one that's at the very end with Brute Justice, right? Yeah,
and there's still debate on whether or not that's intended. I have my stance on it, but...
Right.
It's a very weird one because, okay, so you look at A6, right? And you get punished if you don't do the wave correctly, the stack correctly, right? You would think because A8 is now a combination of those robots, like in an ultimate form, you think it would operate the same way, but it doesn't. For some reason, it doesn't punish you on the quote unquote hardest fight of that tier. You know, like it's supposed
let
to
it be known that the other elemental debuff in A8, which I think was compressed thunder, right?
Yeah,
that one still punished you.
Yes.
In the earlier phase, so the interaction of punishment is still there, just not with one of them.
I would love to like pick the developer's brain on that. Like, what was their thought process in having like one aspect of the element, like the thunder one, punish, but like the one at the very end not? I would love to like get their insight on it, because
I kind of have a question about that to go on a small tangent about.
We should probably highlight what we're even talking about, but go ahead.
Yeah, I guess highlight that real quick because I'm gonna go on a pretty big tangent here.
So what we're specifically talking about a mechanic that was found in two different places in Midas. It was found in A6 and it was found in A8. It was called compressed water. And I'm trying to remember the specific of how you failed the mechanic. Do you remember how exactly we triggered the tidal wave?
You'd have to freeze it, I believe. Was it freezing? I don't know.
No, freeze. Spawning the tornado that you later freeze is how means the mechanic was done successfully. It's when the tornado didn't spawn that it failed. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was just not soaking it properly or having the player die with it. That was what it was.
The sack strat.
Yeah, because it was what led to the sack strat, right? So when somebody dies with the debuff in A6, it triggers the mechanic's failure, and I can't remember the name of the mechanic failure. It was something wave. It was like tidal wave or something. I can't remember. But it triggered that debuff, which was basically a raid wipe.
Yes.
Your raid exploded. And you take that same debuff in A8 when you take the compressed thunder from A6 and put compressed thunder in A8, compressed thunder's failure mechanic exists. Compressed water's failure mechanic did not exist. And that meant that players were able to just suicide the player with the debuff and completely remove the debuff from the fight. And that has always been like a big mystery, I think, in the history of Prague, as to why that was. There was conspiracy theories about the fact that maybe they copy pasted the normal compressed water over to A8 Savage instead of the Savage one, because the normal and the Savage compressed waters were different. I wish I was more prepared to answer this question because I don't remember how they were different, but I do remember they were different. And maybe that was one of the causes. Maybe it was just they forgot a line of code, or there's the third argument of that's just the intention of what they wanted. They just wanted you to not have a large punishment behind it. And I don't know. My personal feeling is that there's something wrong with it, and it's not their intention that you can just suicide it. But everyone's going to have different opinions, I think, on it.
I don't think.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you because it just seems so inconsistent with the rest of the fight. If that was their intention, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense that they would purposely put something in there that would reward you for dying. I don't think that should be. To me, logically, that doesn't make much sense. And so, even if they put it in there and they're like, "Hey, we don't want to make it as punishing," it also made the fight easier, and that would be an overlook in my view. But what I wanted to actually tangent into, just for a bit here, is that we don't really know what they were thinking because we don't have an active, open discussion with the developers about what they're doing with the content, right? Now, I don't know if this is common in other MMOs. Like, Layla, you're pretty big into the WoW scene. Is there usually a pretty active discussion on why things are implemented and how they implement it different fights?
Oh, there should be. Blizzard does. I'll be honest. Blizzard does just as bad of a job as Square Enix a lot of times. The avenue of communication is much better because one actually exists for players to Blizzard as opposed to players to Square Enix. There is a PTR where things are tested and feedback is given based on the testing cycles. I think that this is the problem only for the Western player base of Final Fantasy. There's no barrier of language when you're communicating with the people up top. Blizzard is like their headquarters is down the street from me. I think that they still fail, to be honest. So I'm not going to tout them as being like this pedestal that Square Enix should try to reach because they do a really bad job as well in keeping communication about changes and stuff and also their plans. But the avenue is there, and I think it's unfortunate that we don't even have that avenue for player communication right now.
I mean, we don't have like a person that we think about clearly besides people we can't actively talk to saying things about raids. We don't there's not like a raid guy. You're not like, hey, this is the guy who goes out and when there's a big issue about stuff about raiding, he goes out and he says his piece to everybody in the NA audience or English speaking audience. This is what Yoshida said, and this is the translation of what Yoshida said. So we're always talking to Yoshida, so we do have that barrier there. I don't know if there was someone dedicated to that within the Square Enix community or corporation that was like, hey, look, I am the face of raiding. When you see me, I'm the person who actively talks to the development team. I'm actively going through all the different scenarios of what we should do with raid and what the NA side is thinking, what the EU side's thinking, and communicating that clearly over to the JP side. If that would be a good thing or not, or if that would just... I mean, it sounds like it would be a good thing. I just don't know if that's something that would be logical, right?
Sounds like it would work. I think the logistics of it would always be a struggle. I'm not going to be able to speak to like how the internal processes of how
we can't.
They should do it. We can't. We don't have that kind of information. We don't know what goes on in their offices. It's ignorant of us to even try to assume. I think that one thing that I thought was kind of funny though is the few times that they have tried to like reach out about changes to encounters specifically, because they're pretty good about explaining the changes to jobs. They're not always good, but I'd give them a B+ on explaining the changes to jobs over the years. But where they've like really missed the mark is communicating their changes to encounters, because they fixed the most glaring bug that we haven't even spoken about yet. The A6 water bug.
Yeah. They
fixed that with the most ambiguous note at like the bottom of a set of notes in a Tuesday update.
I remember this. Yeah, I remember.
It was like fixed an issue where Vortexer was not behaving properly or something like that. Like, it was extremely ambiguous. You have no idea what they actually changed, and you just zone into the raid hoping that, oh god, I hope that they fix water. They have no mention of water.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give them like a D- for trying. But dear lord, you need to like be much more consistent and better in communicating what it is you actually just did to a fight.
Yes.
And this is like a very rare example of when they actually did communicate something, because more often than not, they'll just change a fight without saying a damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
And big complaint there.
Yeah. And I'll say this just to make sure it's clear too. I have spoken to, and I know a lot of the NA community team, and they're all great people. They all work really hard. I understand this completely. My thought was just like, if they added another person on the team, and that way the community had someone to direct all their anger and thoughts and opinions, and this guy dealt with a certain area of the game, which I think is pretty crucial to an MMO, which is raiding. You saw this guy, and this is the raiding guy. And I feel like that could do wonders.
Fold. Get Ghost Crawler on the phone.
We could hope, man, because the problem I see with Square Enix is that
Sorry, guys, a little bit of WoW humor there.
Yeah.
It's just a one-way street when it comes to 14, because they clearly listen. You know, the team listens when they get feedback and they make changes, but you never really get to see what's going on inside like their headquarters. You know, you never get to see like the developer insights. And I know WoW is very like big on those developer insights. I would love to see that in 14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we're going to see some of that at FanFest, which Fold you're going to, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Hell yeah, brother.
All right.
Got me the ticket ready to go.
Excellent. This is which is going to be wonderful. It's going to be a fun time. I'm not going to do any MogTalk stuff when I'm there. I'm just going to enjoy
gonna be
it.
lit with my boy Fold K Koner.
Hey, Koner, good buddy.
But I mean, I'm sorry. I just want to go on that tangent too, because it's something that I was thinking about, and I was like, if these are little things that you just need people in a position to be dedicated to doing this stuff, and I don't think it's too costly in the wide scope of what they could probably get back from doing that. But then again, I don't work on the behind the scenes Square Enix. I hate to be ignorant and say things that make no sense financially or anything else. It's just my outside perspective. But going back to rating, going back to Midas in general, it led up to, I think one of the biggest notable things is that Brute Justice was just visually a huge, giant leap forward visually, and it felt like it was actually, and Layla, you have your opinion, but a lot of people say it's one of their favorite fights was Brute Justice. When you got into that and you're like, hey, I'm doing normal mode, okay, Brute Justice, okay, cool. Then you went in and you did Savage and you saw Brute Justice and he popped wings out. You're like, holy fuck, this is good. This is intense. I'm excited. And that's when they start to introduce that.
I had a tweet about this actually, because some people were, it was in the middle of Prague and somebody like asked me, how you doing on like Brute Justice? And you know, at the time of that tweet, we were nearing the end of the first form of Brute Justice before the wings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to the gavel and all that. And somebody asked me how you're doing on it, and I basically said, yeah, we thought we saw the light at the end of the tunnel, but it turns out it was just an oncoming train, because we had a whole nother phase of Brute Justice.
Oh man, yeah,
Justice going on.
And that was something they needed to do for Savage, I think.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't mean, giving them dedicated visuals and things that are just that much more awesome and that much more cool does put a lot of value into Savage content, even though it is more difficult in the end. Let's say they didn't put the wings in there, they just added that extra phase. It wouldn't feel as good as seeing this extra phase and then him turning into something much more crazy. And it's, as raiders, we like difficult content, right? You guys love it being difficult, but you also like being rewarded with cool things like a robot sprouting wings out. As little as that may seem to some people.
Absolutely, I think it was the first time Square Enix experimented with the idea of adding like a new Savage only phase.
Mm-hmm.
I think they did well on it.
Yeah, me too. I think Layla, you said you didn't like the current like formula for raid tiers.
Yes,
right? Because there's no continuity and there's no. But personally, I like it. Like I'm a huge sucker for fan service.
That's what that's what these tiers are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what these tiers are. I'm a huge sucker for fan service. But the transition, that's something you only get in Savage that you don't get in normal. But the transition between the door boss and the real boss is like, it's kind of like your little, that's kind of your treat for being an endgame raider, right?
Yes.
On that note, okay, Layla, you can go, Layla. I'll go after.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I love fan service too, but I kind of want it. I like it when it feels right. It's not just thrown in there. For example, let's say Kefka was introduced to the game, but they built up to Kefka. It wasn't like maybe he was a Garlean soldier and he actually had a backstory within this game that made him into a Kefka character, right? Like Sid is a character in the game, but he's part of the universe. It isn't just some random character that's put in there. I would rather it be this guy is some evil genius trying to destroy the world and we have a raid that we eventually defeat him in. But if they just throw him in there and they're like, hey, look, it's cool. You remember this guy?
All right, go fight him.
Yeah, I don't like that. They could juice.
Fair enough.
They can juice this nostalgia so much more than they are. Instead of just throwing them in there one after another, they can build up to these, and they used to do that. I mean, Bahamut was built up to, right?
You had Louis Swa like appearing after every single turn in Binding Coil and Second Coil. Maybe not every single one, but like half of them appearing as like in the little post-fight cutscene, and then it builds up to the fact that in turn 12, when you end up fighting him. Spoilers, by the way. And that's just something you don't have anymore.
Right. And I feel like they could do that, though. They could take this nostalgia and kind of just layer it in there. And I'm fine with just slowly kind of getting it and building it into the universe instead of just throwing it out there and saying, all right, well, we did that now. Like, if they ever introduced Sephiroth, it'd feel weird, but I wish they wouldn't just throw it in as, like, an extra fight. I wish that he was like some Garlean leader that was some crazy person that we had to eventually fight.
You just don't like the Omega formula then, because that's literally what the formula is. It's just they've given themselves this freedom to have endless cameos because they've put the plot device of they're coming from another dimension or whatever the hell it is. I'll be honest, I haven't even seen all the Omega cutscenes. I watched the Deltscape ones and I just thought it was so stupid that I just checked out. That's very personal opinion.
You don't like Alpha, man? Alpha, that's like he's the star of the show.
I've heard everyone loves Alpha after Alphascape, so maybe I should revisit it. But for what I've seen just through Deltascape, I didn't like any of it. I thought it was lazy. I'm just gonna be honest.
I thought it was it is lazy. Like the part I appreciate is I like fighting bosses that are recognized from older Final Fantasy games and seeing their abilities kind of reimagined in a modern day MMO. That part is cool. But the story stuff, I could see why you'd say it's lame, but I'm one of those, I'm a total cutscene skipper, so I don't look at any of the story anyway, so it doesn't affect me at all. Okay. So that's probably why I don't hate it as much as you guys do.
Here's what I'll say. they can appeal to you while also appealing to everyone else by just integrating them better. They can have their world of Final Fantasy XIV. Okay, so I want to give you an example. Say we take like God Kefka, and everyone wants to see what's God Kefka going to be like in Final Fantasy XIV. What's the Final Fantasy XIV imagining of Kefka going to be? What are the mechanics going to look like? What's going to look like when he supernovas? Like stuff like that. And they can do all that while still not completely destroying any semblance of immersion by integrating him into like an already present storyline. I'm going to give you a really, really, really bad example, but I think it's an example that at least enough people will be able to understand. Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIV crossover event. Okay, it was a really stupid event. I'm sorry, but it was integrated into the game. It was integrated as a fate into a fate system with a like Final Fantasy XIV storyline leading up to you participating in a fate with Lightning fighting a mob that came from Final Fantasy XIII. And it's integrated into the world of Final Fantasy XIV. It doesn't feel out of place, and it doesn't feel as just like a senseless cameo. They can do stuff like that all the time with as many cameos as they want. It just requires a lot more effort. So that's why when I look at Omega, I just call it lazy, because with more effort, they could appeal to both what I wanted and what Bach wanted.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair.
No, I agree with it completely.
100%. Yeah.
And I hope I see that more. Fold, I haven't heard your opinion. You want to throw something in there, your 2 cents real quick?
Well, I really I can see where Bach's coming from, because I was a huge FF6 fan, and the thought of Kefka being reimagined in a 14 raid was pretty amazing, right? On the other hand, I would love to see more story. Like, I'm thinking in my head. Okay, so I'm thinking like WoW style raids where we like invade, the Garlean base and all that cool stuff. I would love to see something like that. I don't know how it would work out, but like a WoW style raid where we're invading like a fortress, fight a couple bosses. Some of them might be trash. I don't know. 14 doesn't seem to like trash these days.
What was it? Kazmadan? Kaza? What was it called? And that big
world are you talking about?
The WoW tower.
Karazhan?
Karazhan, yeah.
Cosmodan.
I was trying to remember.
Very different thing, by the way.
Yeah, I know. But if they brought that into the game, that would be pretty. I mean, that was one of the highlights of WoW. But I mean, if they could bring,
a lot of people agree with you.
That would be a great style.
Everybody loves Karazhan.
Someone said MSQ roulette. So imagine if an MSQ dungeon like Castrum. Imagine if Castrum was a raid. Think about that. Like, would it be good? Would it work in 14? I
mean, I don't see why it wouldn't. They have gone against
Final Coil was close, I think. I think Final Coil was close to that. If you think about walking through Final Coil with no teleporters.
Yeah.
I mean, they already built a whole new zone with Eureka, right?
Yep.
They could build a whole zone dedicated to raiding that still progressed, right? And you would say, hey, this zone, when you kill this boss, he just isn't there anymore when you zone in. It's not... I don't think it's too far off. And it does add a lot to the value of that raid because you feel like you're there. Exactly. It doesn't feel like you are... you're just going from one little warped spot to another warped spot. So it does reduce kind of what they can do with the environment, but I don't need an environment that changes with every single boss. It can be just a progression environment, I guess, if that makes any sense.
It's like a typical Final Fantasy XIV theme at this point, where it's either a circular or square arena. I'm looking at you, Chaos. It's one of those two.
Floating in outer space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's actually funny because one of my real life friends who does not play Final Fantasy at all comes and visits my stream sometimes when I stream, and every single time he makes the same comment. He goes, "Oh, look, you're fighting another boss in a circular platform in outer space. This game's so interesting." Like every single time, and I'm like, I was telling him, "Oh yeah, there's a new raid tier coming out." I was like, "Oh okay." So he tunes in. We're fighting chaos. Like, oh, it's a square arena in outer space now.
They shifted it up, man. It's good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going through this, we kind of hit a lot of tangents with Midas here.
I feel bad because like we keep dragging you on tangents, Frosty, because we
It's
keep
okay.
like, well, we keep
Yeah, man.
you keep like comparing it to the way things
Well,
currently
when
are.
we get to Stormblood,
And
we'll
I
have
think that-
nothing. It's okay. It will just finish off.
Well, right, but I think it's like important, like when we're thinking back on all this stuff, that we are comparing it to like what we have now, because a lot of the people listening to your show, especially,
Mhm.
I would say maybe not most of them, but a large portion of them probably only have played Stormblood, so they only know what they have now,
Mhm.
and for us to be able to like compare or relate it to what they have now is probably worth doing. So, I wouldn't
It's
feel too
easier
bad
to
about
understand.
tangents.
It's easier
Yeah.
to digest. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so too.
I agree. Because I mean, right now is what we're comparing to the game was, and I mean, kind of going through this whole evolution, we're seeing kind of how it came to where we are today, and I mean,
Yeah.
kind of making guesses and kind of how the developers were thinking when they were going through it, because we know what the community, or at least the vocal part of the community, was thinking during
So
these times.
I guess your discussion started off with us, deciding like how we felt about the Savage only phase that they introduced in Midas, and like the sort of identity that it brought to that raid, and I think that the identity of it was definitely there. I feel that what they did with Midas, I really liked. And I will just end the Omega comparisons by saying that what they've done with the three scapes, in terms of like making their Savage only style phases, I dislike, and I'll say why. I'll save that for when we get to the Stormblood part.
Oh, really? I really like it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I can tell you do, but I'll argue my side when we get there.
Okay, sure.
Well, I mean, we could get into Creator a bit here, too, because Creator started this whole nother phase of raiding. I mean, this started to evolve into, like, a whole new world for us, because one of the biggest changes, as you've told me as well, Layla, is I believe Creator was around the time they stopped requiring you to wait for cooldowns, right?
Yeah, that was the first year they implemented the cooldown reset, which is, I said earlier in the show, like we have these like marks that are like very big marks in the game's history of raiding, and just like we had a few in Realm Reborn, this was the big one in Heavensward. Like there's probably no bigger change to progression than the removal of cooldown reset, or the removal of.
Oh, it was huge.
Cooldowns.
Yeah.
It was huge.
I agree completely. I mean, this
Waiting for cooldown sucks,
No.
first of all. Like, just the enjoyment factor alone
Yeah.
is just, anyway.
So I'm going to paint a picture for you guys, and I hate to keep like referencing stuff from hardcore rating, but this one really sells it. So imagine you're progging Living Liquid 16 hours a day. Living Liquid is a boss that hits really hard. And there's another comparison before this, even with Bahamut. This boss hits very hard, and your cooldown rotation involves using Hallowed Grounds and Living Deads or Home Gangs very early on. If you go into it, you use that, and then you deal with the following mechanic, Digititis, and wipe to that. You now either A, have to wait anywhere from like 3 to 6 minutes for your immunity cooldown, or you have to have a backup strategy, and this was more common. You would have to come up with a backup strategy so that you could do a less optimal strategy that still allows you to pull the boss and still allows you to bypass the phase. That was so annoying to deal with for so many years. The other big offender was like Bahamut Prime. Tanks, you'd have to deal with like 4 flattens in the opening phase of the fight, and going into the second phase as well. Well, not 4 flattens, but 4 sets of tank busters. And tanks would make a cooldown rotation that involved immunities. And if you die to a flatten or a flare breath, your cooldown rotation for the next pull is completely different than the cooldown rotation you used for the previous pull. So while I think the loss of waiting for cooldowns definitely took away some of the tactic people executed in Prague, I think the overall annoyance that it removed is nothing but a positive. Nobody loved. There are certain mechanics that literally required certain buttons, and waiting for those buttons is what nobody liked. That was your get up and stretch break. That was your sit there and literally glaze over staring at a monitor break.
LB. Dude, remember build LB on Living
I mean, that was your run into lightning water in A3 and try to build LB to futility. I specifically remember just wishing that we kept saying in Prague, I wish there was a lever we could just pull that just tells Square, it's like a ready check. We can just hit a lever, and if all 8 players hit the lever, it resets all our cooldowns. We can pull the boss. Well, Square Enix took it one step further, and they were like, when you die, you get all your cooldowns back.
Yeah.
So
when it's a complete wipe.
Massive deal.
Yeah. And I feel like this was probably the quality of life change for every raider that nothing else compares to it. And there's not a single person I think that would ever complain. There's not anything that you lost outside of having to corral everybody once the debuffs were back, right? Or the cooldowns were back. And it changed how fast stuff was being cleared. It changed a lot of different things. A lot of different things.
It's the biggest reason why Prague is significantly faster now.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I agree. I think it is the defining reason why Prague is as fast as it is right now.
Yeah, and it's good. I mean, we used to just value content by how long it took to clear, but I mean the content it may be a little bit easier, but it's also going to be cleared 10 times faster than it was before, so it's harder to compare.
Yeah, when people say, "Oh, this makes the content so much faster to clear," it makes it easier, and they say it in the same light as if they're saying it makes it less interesting because it's cleared so quickly. But honestly, if you're just sitting around, like you said, 1, you have to wait longer between pulls for cooldowns. 2, you can't formulate, a consistent cooldown rotation. Tank plan. Yeah, just because you start the fight with different cooldowns, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you took those things away, it's almost like you're artificially increasing the difficulty level. It's not actually more difficult. It's just more annoying to do.
Right.
And it just slows down your progress, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's 100% positive. There's nothing negative you can say about it.
Yeah.
It makes it more interesting. Like this, in my mind, there's no argument that it makes the game dull or easier.
Yeah. There's no argument whatsoever.
At this point, you're machine gun pulling when you're progging,
I will play devil's advocate for you because I do know the counter argument that people might argue. Once upon a time, I felt this way too, but I don't necessarily feel this way anymore. What you lost by implementing cooldown resets is you lost sort of an avenue of being able to think on your feet and adapt to a new situation every wipe. So me as a tank, I'll use tanking as an example. You've just wiped to a boss. You're looking at your hotbars right now. You're assessing, okay, if we pull right now, what do I have? Okay, where am I going to put this? I'm going to put, okay, this means if I want to survive this phase with what I have, okay, I need to put this here, I need to put this there, I need to put that there. And in a prog setting, there is probably a skill to being able to adapt to any cooldown situation that you're given after a wipe. That is something that you did lose.
To counter that, everybody just waited. No one, most prog.
That's not true.
Well, with hardcore maybe not. People who are racing, maybe not. People who felt like they had to get as many pulls as they needed that night because they were just trying to pull them.
Sure. I guess I'm talking about the 1%.
No, you're right. You're right. That element is interesting and is removed, but I think the overall package is just
I will gladly take what they've given us.
Oh, absolutely.
I much prefer being able to just pull the boss all the time.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I think. And the main reason I want to bring it up too is when we're getting into comparisons with how long it takes to clear content. It's that change alone kind of doesn't let you equate it as much to previous fights before the change happened towards what we have now. Because you can't compare those timelines as well. Because they're going to be completely different.
Yeah, it is a little bit apples to oranges, yeah. I mean, that's only when you're literally asking about progression speed, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can still compare fight design to fight design. The only thing that's changing is speed of progression.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I mean, too. It's a lot of people just look at the timelines.
Sure.
But I mean...
Progression speed does not equate to difficulty, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So A9S, we talked about how A1S was a pretty good intro fight. A9S became one of those intro fights that you're like, this is showing us how insanely easy this content can be. Or that's what it felt like to a lot of people who are progressing on that. We didn't really hit A5S, which I think is kind of sad because I loved A5S as an intro fight. I felt like it added a lot of just mechanics and lots of goofy things that people had to do, and it felt like a good introduction to raiding. Hey, you have to do mechanics to clear a fight. And then when we got to A9S, I felt like it was kind of a letdown. Did you guys agree with that at all?
You're talking about A9 specifically?
Yeah, A9 specifically, yeah. I felt like that was when we all started to get kind of concerned about what the content could turn into because of how easy
I'm trying to think
it was
about
to go
A.
through.
So it was a downgrade from A5, but it was an upgrade from A1.
I don't know if it was an upgrade through. Do you guys think it was an upgrade?
I don't think it was an upgrade through A1. It felt like it was
In what way? Difficulty or like enjoyability?
Everything about it.
I hated A9.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I know that.
I didn't like the fight at all.
The mechanics were too basic, in my opinion.
Mhm.
It was very.
A1 was really basic though.
A1
Really basic.
It had more, but the thing is, it was more. Like, you went into that point to where you split up into two different bosses. You had to balance out the damage between the two, and you had mechanics to execute with tanks kind of being on its separate parts of the arena. This one was a tank hitting the middle penis for like the entire fight, and the other tank eventually came in and picked up Faust, right? Or like adds every once in a while. I don't know. It didn't feel good.
Okay,
Man, you could kill it in like by the end of the raid tier, people were killing it in under 3 minutes or something.
Yeah.
When I say basic, I'm talking like they're very basic mechanics. It's like, hey, sack for this AoE. Here's
Stand
an
behind the rock.
Yeah.
Pick up the tomato. Put it down over there.
I guess the other problem with it is like there's one element of a boss encounter that is completely removed from that fight, and that's the ability to move the boss and like boss positioning. Maybe that alone is enough to argue against it being more difficult than A1.
So just like the very basic mechanics that A9 had, in comparison to like even A5 had very, very good mechanics in my opinion. A1 was not as basic as A9 in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think I can side with their argument. But do you guys both agree that A5 was a step above both of them?
A5 was perfect to me.
In quality?
I loved A5.
Yeah.
In quality and difficulty.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I really liked A5.
And I wish A5 was like, just a standard for what they should do with intro fights.
A5 was great, man.
Yeah. It's not like it didn't take just player skill overall, like damage-wise and everything else. It took some things that you're like, hey, I can do something a little goofy for a while and experiment with this new kind of mechanic that they have. And it was just good to wet your feet and get in there. Then when we get, I will say, it was nice that when we get into like A10, that was like one of the first fights that was like a hallway, right? And so it wasn't exactly a square, right? It was a rectangle.
Goblin, yeah.
We got a rectangle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So it was different in some way. Yeah.
We got a spiky rectangle.
Yeah. And so I feel like that was their little thing for that fight.
The steamrolly boy.
That guy. Yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, that's right. You'd basically be fighting a steamroller for like, I don't know how long that usually took. Like just for like 10, 15 seconds. And now, you know what? To be honest with you, what was... Oh yeah, and then we came into A11. A11 was... It was one people hated because it brought in that mechanic you guys hated. The one where you had to balance your DPS.
Oh man, the phase pushes in that fight were so stupid. It was like doing a different fight every week as you got more gear.
Big experimentation on their part in that fight. Big
How many phase
experimentation.
pushes were there in that fight? There's over 10.
There were so many.
Yeah. It was
Like
all
when you
over.
thought you found them all, like you discover a new one like later on.
A11 is like the most glaringly obvious example of them trying to make fights more dynamic and them experimenting with ways to make fights more dynamic. Because they were probably really tired of people just like calling their game scripted and their encounters scripted, and I think that was them experimenting with, okay, well, we'll make it less scripted. The problem is when you go so far off script as you were able to with A11, things start lining up very badly.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is not, in my opinion, is not a bad thing, because it goes back to that small devil's advocate you had with the cooldown reset, is that you had to think on your feet, right? You're like, okay, well, this is different now. This is going to be out of line. How am I going to deal with this?
It depends how you tune it. If you tune it if you're literally just giving full uptime with no DPS cooldowns, here's where I draw the line. Okay, I got it. I just actually figured it out in my head.
Okay.
I draw the line where a fight pushes are so strict that they require you to completely stop attacking, as opposed to a fight's timings are strict enough to the point where they require you to change your order of cooldowns. So I'm thinking of A11 specifically. I remember at certain points during Creator Farm, we were moving cooldowns around to get things to line up differently, and cooldown that puts an element of tactic into cooldown management that doesn't require you to literally sheathe your polearm or your bow and just stop attacking the boss. But that is a very hard thing to tune for, because not only are they tuning for week 1 DPS checks, at that point they're also tuning for week 12 continuity of the fight, and that's a really difficult ask.
Well, I mean, and we kind of saw a reflection of that in the next fight. That I'll bring that up as a different point. But like here, I don't see that as a bad thing, because it still gives you some sort of challenge. I know speedrunners of the fight hated it.
Oh, they hated it.
They couldn't stand it. But I mean, if you're already so good that you're pushing it, for some reason they love balance. Yeah. Well, because it makes them look good in the end, right?
I don't know, man. You can't make this shit up.
But this fight doesn't make you look good if it doesn't react how you expect it to. But I don't know. When we get into kind of talking about the very last part of the fight, the tier, the last thing we leave off on is Alexander Prime, which caused, in the one thing that I take from that fight, it not only me being personally a paladin for that fight and having to experience that whole difference between paladin and dark knight, but also the fact that they put in the most difficult part of the fight at the very end of the fight that could be skipped, led us to what I think we kind of have today with a lot of the fights.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you like it? What do you think of that?
I think that there should be a better balance of it. I think that there should be a way that when you phase push, it doesn't feel clunky like it was in A11, but you're going to have to deal with the hardest part of the fight at the end of the fight, no matter how good your DPS is. You're going to have to deal with that at some point. I understand the concept and the argument that players get rewarded by not having to do mechanics because they do enough DPS, but I'm a mechanics guy, and I like mechanics, and I feel like I want to see more of it. And when you pretty much make the content for people who are so good that they're bursting through it billions of times easier because they're just really good at doing damage, I feel like that's counterproductive to making, I guess, your hardcore crowd happy. Because I, in my mind, I think that people who are going out there and doing that want difficult content. They don't want things to be easier than it could have been. Does that make any sense? Maybe I'm just talking and saying odd things.
No, it definitely does, and it also raised the value of Astro outside of the balance changes, of course,
Right.
because there were balance changes that patch. It raised the value of just like raid-wide DPS tremendously from other progression tiers. You know, if you had amazing damage, you were skipping some really hard things. And I think I hate to jump to current day, but I think that's why they design these fights right now with the hardest part of the fight in the middle and not at the end.
Mhm.
Yes, that's exactly why they do it.
Because they do not want people to skip their hardest
Yeah.
part. But that comes with its
Yeah.
problems.
Because you remember Alexander Prime, right? It's like the first time you did it, you saw the confession puddles,
You
and then within a couple,
this is great.
yeah, a couple weeks later, you never saw it again.
Yeah, the
Like,
communion puddles. Yeah, that's like the biggest
saw them.
example of why they would do that. Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, like you just never saw them again. Like after after you've killed it a few times, right?
Yeah, no, and that was exactly what I meant there. It's just it doesn't make
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It seems like that fight I personally enjoyed it as a paladin because there's no paladins playing, so I always felt like I was really good because I was the best of like 5 people.
Frosty, you're awesome.
Yeah, thank you. But when we were going through and doing that content, because I was playing Paladin as one of the reasons, we hit that phase every time. We went to the third puddle of communion or whatever. We went to like the very end. We were dealing with all of the mechanics, and we did that for a lot of the fights. And I wasn't upset about it. I was content. I was like, wow, we're doing this whole fight to the enrage point to where we have to see everything. And we're dealing with this giant climax that we're trying to get past at the very end of the fight. That's not there anymore. It's gone. You're dealing with one climax in the middle of the fight and just a home run stretch.
Yes.
It's them no longer able to tune fights in a way that your first kill sees all the mechanics even, because there were a lot of people's first kills that didn't even see communion. That happened in like the weeks 2 or weeks 3, I think more specifically. I think that if you take a mechanic like communion, which is, I'm trying to think, is communion the hardest part of that fight? I'm not sure. It's pretty difficult.
I would say it's the most difficult
compared to the other mechanics, I would say. So we'll, for argument's sake, say the communion's the hardest part of that fight. If you put it, say, 20% earlier, but then have it, so like what Stormblood does right now, right, is they take the really hard mechanic and they put it dead center of the fight, because the way that Stormblood's encounters are designed is after 50%, they're usually a repeat of the fight entirely. If you take something like communion, put it around like the 20-25% mark, maybe even the 30% mark, and then follow it up with maybe mechanics that you've already seen, but harder combinations of them. I can't think of a specific example with Alexander Prime because I don't remember all the fight right now. You're not losing a ton of like a mechanical introduction by skipping them, but also by doing them for the first time, you're not also subject to the fact that you're literally just doing a rinse repeat of the same fight, which is what they're trying to go for now. They've designed it so that if you skip the last 30% of a boss, well, you didn't skip anything you hadn't already done, so you still get the check mark for having done everything in the fight. I think it's okay to just have more difficult combinations of mechanics that you've already seen for the second half of the fight, but definitely not a rinse repeat. I'm highly against the rinse repeat formula. This is something that WoW does, by the way. WoW, let's use Kil'jaeden as a perfect example. Kil'jaeden in Legion, the last phase of his fight, and the better your DPS got as the tier went on, the last phase of his fight is a bunch of how do I equate this to Final Fantasy? Imagine like a set of chakrams spawning around the arena. But imagine that the chakrams spawn every like 30 seconds, and imagine that every time they spawn, there's an additional chakram. So like as the phase drags on, it's getting harder and harder to dodge stuff, but it's still the same mechanic that you've seen. So skipping those last set of mechanics, you're just skipping a mechanic that you've already seen, but it would have been more difficult had you kept going. And I think that's like an ideal thing that they should be striving for, not just a copy paste rinse repeat like they have right now.
Yeah, I think there is a comparison somewhere in Final Fantasy. I'm not thinking of it right now. I mean, we could also talk about A7S and doing the last set of jails, but that would be pretty much the same thing as.
I mean, the last set of it's not even like the last set of jails were the hardest part of A7S though. I'm trying to think what the hardest part of A7S was. It was probably the triple balls.
Dodging the balls with the server latency.
It's probably
was
the triple balls. And
I think the last set of jails is the hardest part.
do you actually?
I thought the balls were kind of hard, but not as hard as the last set of jails.
I thought the balls with the hard check was pretty. Because think about it, like your DPS had to be on point there. If anyone messed up with the balls, that heart was probably going to reach the boss and heal him for a while.
Yeah. But anyways, to your point, yeah. So were you saying that was a pretty good thing to pretty much introduce the same set of mechanics, but make it just more and more increasingly difficult until the end of the fight?
That's what I would do if I was trying to fix the problem that they have right now. And we haven't really gotten into the fact that it's a problem, but I kind of feel that it's a problem that the entire second half of Stormblood bosses are just rinse repeats. I think that the way, but we also had the problem in Heavensward of you can with good DPS you literally just skip entire mechanics that you haven't even seen. So there has to be a balance between the two. So I think putting the hard mechanics earlier as opposed to the very end, but maybe putting hard combinations of mechanics you've already seen afterwards. I think that's the ideal.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you guys agree, Bach, Fold?
You go first.
Oh, I was gonna say, what's a good fight? What is a fight that I guess best exemplifies that, if there are any? I guess
I mean, maybe A7S actually is the example. But that kind of is the hard part at the end of the fight. But it's mechanics you've already seen. They just kind of get progressively harder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Trying to think. There's probably a better example though.
There is. I just can't think of it right now.
Maybe Turn 8. Turn 8 might be another example.
What about 07? 07.
07.
So you get the same programs again, but they're harder, or they're different in some way.
Yeah. 07. Yeah. What would you argue is the hardest part of 07? Is it the virus?
The hardest part of 07?
Yeah, just mechanically.
I think second data luma and second what's it called, ink are the
okay, so
those are the
those
phases
are literally
that you feel
just
the most.
Their difficulty is created from a combination of mechanics, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's something that they could do, but would you want that formula for every single boss of the tier, where you've seen all the mechanics 2 minutes into the fight and the entire remainder of the fight is just them changing how those mechanics interact with each other?
Yeah.
I don't know if you would want to do that for every
I don't
boss.
know. I probably wouldn't. I'm just sick of for the final boss. I don't like how you just get the kind of a repeated phase. The difference between Hello World 2 and Hello World 1 is pretty minor. In fact, we base our strategy on Hello World in such a way that we're doing the same motions. So as we're doing Hello World 1, we're also practicing Hello World 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Forsaken, the fourth Forsaken, the third Forsaken in Kefka, exactly the same. I don't know why they did that. They should have introduced a different Forsaken, but then you get to a point where it's skippable through DPS, and I guess that's what they wanted to avoid, right? I don't think it's that bad.
I think the Kefka one. I think the Kefka one is probably the least offender.
Yeah, I think so.
Littlest offender, smallest offender, whatever I'm trying to say. As opposed to X Death or Final Omega, those two are massively larger offenders than what Kefka was, because Kefka's rotation actually wasn't a copy paste rinse repeat. It was the same. It was exactly kind of what I was talking about. It was the same mechanics you've already seen, but now they line up
different order. The only thing that is a carbon copy is the third and fourth Forsaken.
Yes, with the towers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they probably could have been a little bit more interesting with that. Maybe in that Forsaken, put another mechanic in that Forsaken that you've already seen. I don't know. Put a fucking trine in there.
Oh my god.
Here's an idea though. So let's combine the issue that everyone hates A11 for. So what if for Alexander Prime, what if his communion phase began at 30%, like just flat out? It wasn't time based. How do you feel about that?
Oh, like a forced percentage push.
Yes.
So like,
I think they're fine. I think
that's-
percentage
that's
pushes
a
are
good
fine.
idea.
So like,
As long as they're well implemented.
yeah.
That's what WoW does, by the way.
So the way that they could implement that is they can have these repeating mechanics, right? And so they go through, and then there's a point to where it repeats, but if you get it to 30%, you'll see less of that repeat, and you'll just go into the next phase.
So
Yeah.
you know where my head's at right now, Fold? What we're describing is literally Kill Jaden.
It's literally Kill Jaden. You're
Yeah.
skipping ads. Yeah, you're skipping those big ads.
So you're going through mechanics that sort of kind of do cycle through each other in different phases. Like phase 1 has its own unique set of mechanics. Phase 2 has its own unique set of mechanics. And then phase 3 has its own unique set of mechanics. And the mechanics are cycling through each other, but they're each set of those phases is gated by a percentage push.
Mhm.
And that makes it like almost impossible for you to not progress through the fight without having seen at least once every single mechanic.
Yeah, as long as they're implemented properly, none of that bullshit like you have in turn 7, where if you push at a certain percentage or at a certain time in the rotation, you just wipe because that's just how it is. Right?
That does happen in WoW. So
it does happen in WoW. Yeah.
Like I don't think
pushes.
I don't think it's that hard to implement it. Like, why don't you just like if you push into a certain phase, maybe it gives you the it doesn't give you the shriek right away, or something like that for turn 7, right?
Well, a lot of these fights are designed with mechanics that are locked into that. So the best example I can give you is Adam and Eve. We know that even if you kill the Adam and Eve ads, like they're sitting at 0, they have to complete their they have to complete their rotation before they
before they start the next exactly.
So that could be a case for this. Like
right.
if he's doing Inception, like
there's a set of mechanics that have to occur.
They have to get completed. Yeah.
I think that's
it doesn't just hard
idea.
swap. Yeah.
There's a pitfall to that though, is you run into situations like in Ultimate Weapon, where you purposely wait for a mechanic to happen and then you go hard push. Like, okay, everyone stop. Okay, he started casting the thing. I don't know. Something about it. It just feels janky to me. It's just like you're stopping DPS on purpose. You're slowly killing the thing that you're supposed to kill, waiting for him to start casting something, and then you push DPS. I don't know. It just feels janky to me.
Well, I mean, you could also put a timer in Rage where like he's going through this rotation, and if it's at a certain point, once he's done with that mechanic, he is going to cast his "I kill everyone" move.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels like there's a balance.
I think this. I don't know. I just think the suppression push in Ultimate is stupid.
So here's
I think
why
it's one of the dumbest things in the whole fight.
Here's why the suppression push I think I'm okay with, and this is what I'm realizing this is actually a big problem for what we're arguing for. It's tuned in a way that you can keep full uptime in the boss and still like line up your push with suppression. But imagine that it wasn't a max eye level tuned fight. Imagine the Ultimate Weapon was something that released with like gear upgrades every week. Okay, then you've designed a thing that can be pushed through clever use of like an animation lock to squeeze out an extra 2%. Now imagine that with 20 eye levels of gear. That's a scenario where you've now put the players in a spot where, okay, if they want to do this optimally, they have to sheathe for a while. Mm-hmm. So it only quote unquote works, like, and people don't hate it outside of maybe Bach in Ultimate Weapon, because Ultimate Weapon is tuned for their not like what they tune the fight for is what is the DPS that you're going to have every time that you try to attack.
Yeah, exactly. A very specific item level.
Yeah,
like a gear, like your gear quality.
I'm realizing this is actually very difficult for them to do in a tier where you're getting gear every week.
Yeah. That's fair. I see your point.
But all right, well, let's wrap up Alexander overall. I mean, Alexander did introduce, there was just some good things that we saw within the community. It was good things we saw quality of life wise, and it kind of gave, I think Square Enix found where they want it to be. Most content feels like it, the fights are different and designed different, but if you had to just give it a loose difficulty scale number, those scale numbers would be pretty close to what we see in raids today, right? In Savage, at least. No?
compared to
Like creator compared to all the raids we're doing now, all the Savage turns and
Talk about completion rates?
completion rates and overall difficulty.
just like I guess our own criteria for difficulty.
Yeah.
For creator compared to Delta, Sigma, Alpha.
Exactly.
You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty comparable.
I'd say
It's been pretty consistent.
Alpha's a tad bit harder, but pretty equivalent to Sigma and Delta.
Yeah. So it was basically at Creator, they found the spot that they want to leave Savage in. And they've been keeping it in that. And before all this happened, I had the privilege of asking Yoshida a few questions. And one of my questions was, hey, you know, the curve of this tier was a downward slate, right? It just got easier and easier every single tier throughout, I guess, Heavensward. Is that going to be the same?
Right.
And he said it was going to be an incline. But they introduced a new concept, which we'll get into in Stormblood, which was Ultimate, which made it to where they felt they didn't need to do that because they already had difficult content.
See, I felt that Alphascape was, if anything, maybe easier than Sigma.
Really?
Like slightly. Yeah, that's just me. I mean, just.
Do you think it's maybe did you play healer for both? You're tanking now, right, Bach?
Yeah, I played healer for Delta. I tanked for Sigma and I tanked for
Okay, because I know you were going back and forth between them.
Yeah. So I went healer tank for this expansion.
Do you feel that your opinion of the difficulty is based on the fact that you are tanking them?
No.
Okay.
Because I try to play all the roles in every fight.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll agree. So if I compare like Final Omega to Kefka, for example, I feel like Hello World is much more punishing than Forsaken, but the mechanics in between Forsaken are more difficult than the ones in between.
And there's less to learn overall too, I'd say. Yeah.
Like some of those mechanics at Omega are pretty intuitive, but I just feel like especially Hello World 2, I feel like it's very unforgiving, and it's a pretty tight dance.
Yeah, it really is. It is pretty tight. It's almost like, it almost feels like ultimate level tight.
Yes.
Like, you know how like the mechanics themselves, they're not particularly more complex, but the degree of precision to, you know, the pass fail check is like, you know, if you're a second too slow or you're a second too fast, it's a wipe.
Yes.
Right. You failed it. But in Kefka, like those windows aren't as precise, right? Yeah, I can see that. For Hello World anyway.
I think about for the middle Forsaken where the DPS have to take the meteor towers. I think there's room for failure there. Like if the DPS miss a tower, it's not necessarily a wipe. You know, you just get damage down. So compare that to Hello World, where if a DPS messes up, it's, you know, you're screwed.
Yeah,
I think that there's more punishment in Alphascape from what I've seen than there was in Sigmascape. I don't know if punishment equates to difficulty, but it definitely, I think I'm comfortable saying it's more punishing.
Okay. So let's do this. What in Heavensward do we miss? Is there something that we want to bring from Heavensward into what we're seeing today in our raids? I know we're going to say A3S, right?
So the equal responsibility aspect of A3S, I think, is something you should bring to every fight you ever make. I feel that even though people like the raid identity of Coil more than they like the raid identity of Alexander, at least Alexander had an identity. You know, you were in a robot. You felt like you were in a robot. You felt that every room was sort of progressing through said robot. I think that I just want to see some semblance of an identity going forward in a raids environment. Difficulty-wise, I'm on the fence because I am curious to see what they're going to do with the Ultimate series in 5.0.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what they're going to be doing with that. I'm sure we'll know pretty soon, I would imagine. I would imagine there's going to be some questions asked in the coming weeks.
The next 2 or 3 weeks, yeah.
I imagine we'll probably know a little bit more about what's going to happen in, say, for the Ultimate Series in 5.0. Because if they don't continue the Ultimate Series, then I obviously, well, maybe not obviously to some, I would prefer that the raids difficulties be scaled a bit more aggressively than they were in Stormblood, like similar to how they were in Heavensward. I liked what they did with Midas. I liked Gordias up to Living Liquid. I think that normal modes maybe should be a little bit harder than they were in Gordias, in Heavensward. But if they continue the Ultimate Series, then I don't necessarily think that they have to do a carbon copy of some of the Heavensward raid difficulties.
Okay. You guys all on the same board there?
I think they got more creative with mechanics in Heavensward, and then they kind of like hit a wall in terms of creativity. Like every now and then you get a really cool fight, like 03, right, with the animal farm, right, and stuff like that, and the changing terrain or whatever. Every now and then you get a cool fight like that, but like looking at this tier, right? Looking at the current tier, for instance, I mean, what's new? I mean, there's a lot of recycled mechanics from previous fights.
You felt that Heavensward as a whole had less recycling?
I thought Heavensward as a whole had less recycling, and every fight it felt like, what are we gonna like? What are they gonna throw at us this time? You know, like look at Creator. It's like
what's the new mechanic they're gonna make us crack this time?
Yeah, exactly. And then nowadays it just feels like what rehashed version of a Heavensward? Yeah, exactly. Right. Stand in this tower, stack, now spread. Now, you know, everyone like find your partner. Okay, go to your protean positions. And I don't know, it's just all the same.
Yeah.
A lot of people really like, I know we're kind of going ahead here, but like a lot of people like 11.
I mean, we could transition, going into Stormblood overall, because I mean, we talked about Stormblood a lot already, so we're just kind of wrapping into what we currently have and what the current state of rating is, and so that's not too bad. I do want to make a quick note. Even though I know it wouldn't add a lot to the rating scene, I'm really upset of the removal of the sand puzzle in 03.
Oh.
It really upset me.
You know what? Honestly, I don't disagree, Frosty.
No, it was awesome.
I don't disagree.
They should have made a harder version of it.
I mean, it doesn't do anything for DPS, but fuck it, man.
There was a diagram for it. We thought we were going to use that going into Savage. We're like, oh, we got to get the optimal like pathing for these sand puzzle. You know.
Yeah, I was really disappointed when I noticed that. And I guess when we're going into kind of start off Stormblood, when we're going into Stormblood, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we already said about it, but we were introducing, I think one of the most unique things about it was saying, we're moving where Faust is at. Right? They put it in a completely different spot. They put it on the end boss.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're basically, I would say it's pretty. They made advanced versions of it.
Here's what I'll define Faust as, though. Faust is honestly just like, you must be this tall to ride. That's what Heavensward Faust was. I don't feel like that's what Stormblood's gatekeepers are. Faust in Heavensward was, if you do not have this level of DPS, do not attempt to raid right now until you do. That's what Faust was. Stormblood is like, okay, you've made it this far. Now, beat me to get the real bad guy. So it's like not the same purpose.
Different purpose, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. No, that makes sense.
I like the new purpose, or I like the new formula a lot more than the old formula.
Yeah, they're completely new fights. They're not just like exclusively like a Faust style, but So when you think about the first 3 turns up until that Faust, you don't generally have a tight TPS check. I think that Faust is the first time you are like hit with a wall, sort of say. And it's a pretty tight wall, like 1 or 2 deaths will guarantee that you don't make the enrage. That's not the case for the other 3 turns in most cases. So this new like Faust that they added before the final boss is sort of that check. They're like, hey, do you have the damage? You know, to this final boss.
I mean, it wasn't just damage, and how they transitioned to it was not damage anymore. It was coordination. Do you have the ability to coordinate with your team too? Because when you're dealing with the Faust version of XDEF, you're dealing with, hey, can you
tank and spank?
Yeah, well, you had to deal with the orbs. You had to move. You had to like position the boss. You had to do some things, right? It wasn't just hit it and see if you know how to do your normal rotation.
That's what makes it a unique fight, you know, because it's not just a dummy, you know.
So you just called it a unique fight.
Yeah.
So you feel that it's a unique fight, right?
It's
like a mini
different-
fight.
It's different from the final boss.
You feel like it can almost stand alone, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So
I know where
I'm gonna kick this off with a bang, okay?
Okay.
We're gonna go deep into Omega right now. We're gonna hit the sore spot.
Okay.
I strongly am opposed to the fact that the current style of Stormblood end boss is you do a mini boss, complete it, receive a checkpoint for a quote unquote final boss that is literally half of a boss.
Yeah.
no reward.
Which part? Okay, which part are you most against? Okay, let's break this down here. Is it the part that there's a mini boss, or is it the part that it makes the final boss, like, I don't know, easier? Like they're making the final boss easier as a result, or
is there like an all
the
the above option that I can check? Because I
like
take
the
issue with
checkpoint?
every
Okay.
single piece of it. So
Oh, really?
yeah. So here's the problem. I want to use XDeath, I think, as the first example. You know, I'm just gonna hit all three, dude. We're gonna go down the line of seven.
Okay, sure.
Let's just start with XDeath, dude. Okay, take XDeath and then take Neo XDeath. Okay. Instead of giving us a dumb checkpoint that literally just makes, I think, the process easier, because you're giving a checkpoint for a boss that is honestly half of a boss, take the entire idea, scrap it, combine XDeath and Neo XDeath into one fight. Okay, the first 60% of the fight is XDeath. Oh, that lines up pretty well because it's a 60% push.
Mm-hmm.
Now you phase transition into Neo XDeath. No checkpoint, no stopping. You've just phase transition to Neo XDeath. You go through all of Neo XDeath's mechanics. By around 15 to 10%, you're hitting Grand Cross Omega, which is, for all intents and purposes, his final mechanic. You have gone through an entire fight with no need for a checkpoint that literally just is only there to make life easier. You've got the cinematic transition. You've gotten all the same mechanics that you did by separating the two bosses, except you've given a stronger sensibility and purpose to XDeath actually existing.
So basically, remove the checkpoint, but make the final part of the boss shorter.
I'm going to take it even one step further.
You know, I like where you're
in this
going.
development in their
Okay.
development cycle for Stormblood. Like, argue against this. I'd like to hear somebody argue against this. When they're designing XDeath and Neo XDeath, do you not think that they first designed A4S without a checkpoint, and then they decided, this might be a little bit too hard. They might have designed it without a checkpoint, with the ending of the fight being Grand Cross Omega, and they're like, well, maybe this is a bit too hard for them. Let's just put a checkpoint here. Oh, but now we only have enough mechanics to make it through 50% of the boss's HP. Just rinse, repeat everything. And they're like, okay, done. A4S is done. Or O4S, excuse me.
And then they just continue that formula.
And then
for
they were
8
like,
and 12.
not many
that
people.
worked.
This raid participation looked pretty good for Deltascape. Let's just do it again in Sigma. Raid participation looks pretty good. Let's just do it again in Alpha.
I would disagree. I would say they 100% went into it creating the fight knowing they were going to make the checkpoint.
I'm with Frosty as well.
They
Okay.
knew what they're doing.
That's what I think.
Because they're so different, right? The XDeath and Neo XDeath are completely different in so many different ways. And if you actually look at Alexander and you look at Alexander Prime, isn't it similar without a checkpoint? You're fighting a robot, you go through all of its phases, and then it runs off to the side, you deal with a tank LB, and you're dealing with the last part of the fight. Which is not far off, I would say, from what O4S became. Just they added in that checkpoint in there to make it easier. And
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's not far off. It's the only element that's removed from that is sort of like, I guess, the Faust.
mhm.
Like you're basically it's P1. Like Faust is basically P1 of the entire X Death fight.
Yeah.
You know.
Mhm.
So I like where Layla's head is at when it comes to this, because it's think about it. So he phases at 60, right? And we all agree that we hate this like repeating mechanics, right?
Right.
Yeah,
You now
I
have
think it's unanimous here.
percent of health to work with. You know, when you're designing these new mechanics, you could
Yeah.
easily put like the what's it called? The what's Neo's hard phase called?
Omega.
Probably Grand Cross
Grand
Omega.
Cross Omega.
Yeah, Grand Cross Omega.
Yeah.
You know,
Instead of occurring at like 50, it occurs at like 20.
exactly. You
something
could
like
put that at the end.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know? So you're pushing his
But
health
not so far into the end that it's easily skippable
Yeah,
by
you
like
have
week
to
3.
decide whether or not you either want it not at the very end, or if you want to do what we talked about earlier and have like a forced 30%
A force
fade,
push. Yeah.
Yes.
that
Yeah. So basically, I know why, and I believe at least why they actually went forward with saying, "Hey, we're going to do this in 2 separate parts," is because someone came to him, Yoshida, and they said, "Hey, Savage kind of sucks if it doesn't have anything special to it. If it doesn't have something new." And that's when we start seeing the evolution through Heavensward. And then he's just like, "Well, what if we just decide a boss, and that's all you see in normal?" And then you get a whole new crazy transition and everything. And this is huge for people who play Savage. They'll love it. And then also it'll be easier for people to clear Savage because they only have to deal with 2 mini fights. Which is like not something that I think is good. But
Yeah.
that's the rationale I can imagine behind it.
So, I think. Do you guys agree though that the fact that a checkpoint exists does just simplify the
Absolutely.
progression?
Absolutely.
Because let me preface this, I guess.
Okay.
You're checkpointing before a boss that literally only has mechanics for half of its lifespan.
Yes.
Well, I've never really looked at it that way. I mean, even though that's essentially what it is like a checkpoint between the 2 bosses. But if the fight's designed to be, you know, to be done that way, it's not a big deal. Like I'm not as against the concept of a checkpoint, just because, you know, you fight a boss, you have to consistently kill that boss to get to the next part, but then, you know, you start, I guess you start after you if you wipe, you don't start over again, you fight the second part. I think that's perfectly fine, but I don't like the fact that for the second boss, the real boss, you know, the second half of the fight's the same as the first half of the fight. That's
Sure.
the part I disagree with.
So I would be more okay with the checkpoint system if, like you said, that what you're checkpointing and what you're putting the checkpoint in front of was an
Yes.
actual full boss.
It was the actual full boss and not
I
you
would
know,
have
half
very
the
little
boss
complaints, I
twice in a
think.
row. Yeah. Right. So if for example Kefka had a 4th Forsaken that was different than 3rd Forsaken, if Hello World 2 was actually different than Hello World 1, and the mechanics, you know, following that were different as well, like it would feel like a fuller fight. I wouldn't mind the fact that I don't think the checkpoint is the problem.
Well, I mean, you know, I'm starting to remember something too from back in the day when they were saying, hey, there's a lot of groups that are complaining that they're going through all these fights and they're getting to a certain point to practice that point. And there was a lot of suggestions of making practice modes where people could fight
Oh,
individual
dear God,
parts of the fight.
I remember this.
Yeah. And so this could
This almost
also
happened.
No, thank you.
Yeah, they were
I'll
saying
say that.
something like they were going to introduce it. And so this could be their halfway point, right? They're like, well, you practiced it, you figured out those mechanics. All right, you got it. Just work on the other part of the mechanics now.
That is possible that this was the byproduct of that discussion, because that discussion did happen before Stormblood. This concept of they're going to start introducing practice modes for specific phases, and I just roll my eyes at that every time. But this may be the result of that discussion they had internally, and you know, I could believe that.
Yeah. And I think going through it, you know, after the all factor, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool, this is nice, kind of wears off, and you look at it as a fight in a whole. We are all kind of upset with the way that they decided to go forward with that. And I hope going forward into our future fights and future end phases that they take that into account, that not everybody wants the fights to be simplified in that way. But I mean, that tier overall, when we're talking about, I mean, were you guys, I think I was expecting the difficulty they put out. I thought the first one was going to be where it's at.
I think we were all expecting that difficulty. I think people were just disappointed that our expectations became a reality.
Yeah.
Well, Stormblood attracted a much larger audience. They had so many like promotions. They had
It's true.
Mr. Freshly, those sweet buns. The XP buff, dude. I got all those sweet buns.
Oh my
Like just
God.
things like that, you know. Like it attracted so much of a bigger audience. So yeah, they wanted to make the rating more accessible to
That's true.
compensate.
A lot of new people were playing the game. It brought a lot of people in, mainly because Samurai and Red Mage were like key jobs as well. That was super fan service. Yeah.
Here's what I will say, like, you know, I feel like, I mean, myself even, I've been shitting on Deltascape a lot. Was there anything that we liked about Deltascape?
I think most people liked O3S in general.
I really liked O3S.
I don't know if you did, Layla, but I know I hear a lot of positive words about it.
I think in terms of Deltascape fights, it was good. I think it was probably my favorite from Delta, yeah. We've sort of got this formula that's spawned as a result of Delta of you have your first fight, which is normal mode plus. Your second fight is special action ability, savage mode. Your third fight is mechanical mess, and your fourth fight is gatekeeper plus final boss. And that's just been the formula for Stormblood every single tier. With I guess they deviated from that with Alphascape, but that's definitely how Delta and Sigma behaved. I think that I liked the fact that what they started to do with Deltascape, and they continued for the entirety of Stormblood, was make savage only mechanics and make savage only phases. It was something that they experimented with in Heavensward, but never actually solidified as a permanent thing. In Stormblood, they clearly made it a permanent thing. So I like that, and I would always encourage them to continue that. That kind of style of designing fights where we make something savage unique, some savage only.
Yeah.
Be it, you know, an end boss after checkpoint, or an end boss and then phase in the middle of the end boss. Other than that, I mean, Deltascape was just a memory lost in the wind for me at this point.
Well, I mean, it
very forgettable to me.
Especially when you're dealing with the introduction of Ultimate right afterwards, and you're dealing with the very first super difficult fight that they're introducing for everybody. And I think that's probably the highlight of the raid scene. If we had to put like something that you can kind of forget about Savage a little bit, everyone just kind of focuses on Ultimate because this was something that people wanted. They wanted to go through and do these fights that was extremely difficult, to the point that we have a 19-minute fight that is heavy on mechanics, memorization, reading words from Nell. It was, I don't know. I feel like that's the one thing they definitely did right. I just hope that they go forward thinking about the same audience they were thinking about when they made Ultimate in some way going into the raid scene for the next expansion.
So, I mean, that segues us nicely into Ultimate.
Yeah.
I think what you're highlighting is the fact that Square Enix identified that maybe their Savage modes were not appealing to all player bases, and that was their driving desire for making Ultimate. And I think that's true, and I think they might have even said that verbatim. I'm going to say that UCOB, which is the unending coil bahamut, it did more good than bad. And I'm going to say that in terms of being what they set it out to be, it successfully was that.
I can hear Box Keyboard having that argument.
I don't know. I can tell if that was Bach or Fold. I don't know if I'm wrestling with it in my mind right now. Is UCOB the hardest encounter they've ever made? I'm inclined to say yes.
Well, don't ask me. I've never done it.
That's true. Actually, I forgot about that. So I get this for question for Fold then. Like, is UCOB the hardest encounter they've ever made?
Everyone says it is.
I'm inclined to believe it is because not because of the mechanics, but because of the endurance.
The length, yeah.
What other fight would even compare?
Seven Savage, second coil.
I'd say 7 Savage, yeah. In terms of
I mean
precision.
that's in terms of precision execution versus punishment. So 7, they're like that, and that's a big thing in UCOB, right? Like one of the difficulties of UCOB is that it is so damn punishing at every turn. I would say, with the exception of the in between phases, like the things leading up to trios. I apologize if you don't know how the fight. If you're listening, you don't know how the fight like actually progresses. But I'll give you like a brief 10-second cliff notes. You fight Twintanya, then you fight Nail, then you fight Bahamut, and while you're fighting Bahamut, you're progressing through a series of 5 dances called trios, 6 if you want to consider the last one a trio. And they're basically like little intermission cycles. They're just like dance phases where you just do the right moves and you get through the phase. Very little DPS required, and the time in between those intermissions is pretty forgiving. But in the mechanics in the actual intermissions themselves are very punishing if done incorrectly. So I think that in terms of comparing like punishment levels, it's pretty comparable to Turn 7 Savage. It's not anywhere near, like Turn 7 Savage doesn't have anywhere near the difficulty because it was 1/3 of the fight duration. But yeah, I would agree that the punishment wise it was comparable.
Right.
See, the way I relate Ultimate, although I've only beaten Ultima Weapon, I haven't done Unending Coil. But from what I understand, this is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or you can tell me if you disagree. But I felt that the mechanics in Ultimate were not any more complex than the mechanics in, say, Savage, like the hardest Savage fights. They weren't any more complex, but like we mentioned, we kind of touched up on it before, but it was like the degree of precision. You know, if you move 1 inch too far or not far enough, you're dead, right? If you're 1 second too quick or too slow, you're dead, right? Whereas like in a fight like Kefka, oh, you got a damage down, oh, you got a vuln stack, oh, you died, we can res you, right? And also the degree of punishment for failing a mechanic is much more severe, right? If you fuck up your bomb placements in Titan, it's a wipe.
Yeah,
it's over, it's done, right? Where if you fuck up your skull in what's it called in Kefka, you just get rezzed and life moved on, right?
Yeah.
So like I guess the things that make it difficult isn't the level of complexity, it's the level of precision needed, the amount that you're punished, but most of all it's the length of the fight, because it's like if you have 5 phases, you call them A, B, C, D, and E, right? All right, so you beat phase A. Now you've earned the right to progress phase B, but you're not consistent at phase A yet. You're only 60% consistent. 60% of your attempts, you're actually making it to B. Okay, now you've beaten B. You're more consistent at A. You're 80% at A, and you're 60% at B. You're only making it to C 48% of your attempts, right? And you continue along this process through a 20-minute fight, like a 19-minute fight. Like, it's really hard to make it to the. It gets more and more difficult the farther you go, because you're not getting there every time. Right?
Especially the ad phase, which is arguably the hardest part of the fight. The nail to win ad phase of.
I think Terraflare is by far the hardest. Yes.
Yes, and that comes right at the end. When you've done everything, so you have to be consistent at all the phases beforehand, and then you have to like iron out.
And like 95% consistent isn't good enough, because like per phase, because that adds up, right? How many how many phases are there until you get to the end? It's like
Yeah, I think what I will say is like UCOB is somewhat forgiving in the sense that like if you do make it through a trio, because the DPS checks are so light, you can like red mage necro your way through the bahamut phase to get through the fight, so long as the people are being rezzed before the next trio. So there is a little bit of leeway. I would say like probably we'll call it like 97% consistency. The other thing that I will say, because you're comparing Ultimate Weapon to UCOB basically, and Ultimate Weapon is unique. It's like it's its own conversation really, because a lot of the difficulty for Ultimate Weapon comes from progging it, and you probably know this from progging it. Like a lot of the difficulty for doing Ultimate Weapon comes from figuring out the cryptic mechanics that it gives you and solving the puzzle of the overall puzzle of the fight. I feel like once you understand the puzzle behind Ultimate Weapon, executing the mechanics themselves, they feel much easier to execute than the mechanics you find in like say UCOB.
That's definitely.
I could see that.
Yeah, like the like not to say that UCOB's mechanics are super taxing, but definitely when like comparing them UCOB versus Uwu, I feel like they're a bit more taxing to execute. And I don't know if that's just the pacing of them or just the mechanics themselves. I haven't really decided. Because a lot of them are returning mechanics we've already seen before. So it's not like solving them was the difficulty, with the exception of maybe one phase, and everybody knows what I'm talking about with Grand Octet, which should not have been as difficult to solve as it was for most groups, mine included. And like there has to be something said that these mechanics are easily solved, yet still they're difficult to live through.
Right.
And to me, that just says a lot about the pacing of the fight. It was a very fast pacing where you're going from mechanic to mechanic in these intermissions, and the fact that any one misstep over 19 minutes typically was a party wipe, I think just created a level of difficulty that we haven't seen in other encounters. Yeah,
I mean that was said pretty well, and I do have to ask. I did hear some noise. I feel like there is some sort of crazy activity going behind that I am just deeply interested in. Did you guys?
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah. I don't know what it was, but
was it you, Bach?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. I thought it was pretty funny. Anyways, another point that I want to bring up about UCOB was that it introduced a style of rating that I kind of want to see, and not like it wasn't the rating that everyone does. It's the rating that people are interested to see. It turned in rating into some sort of like a spectator activity. Because right now, watching someone clear content you clear yourself that you could easily clear isn't that interesting. But if you watch them clear something and you're getting a window into a world that is extremely difficult, and you're seeing some pretty amazing things in your mind when you're a Final Fantasy XIV raider, I felt like that was definitely needed for the game, and I'm really glad that was introduced. So, and again, we all know like how Twitch kind of got a lot of activity over that. This is an aspect I want to see more in the game.
Absolutely. I would love to see more viewership when it comes to Ultimate, and I mean it's fun to watch. You know,
Yeah.
If I wasn't progged it, I'd be watching it nonstop because it's exciting to watch. Especially the thing about Uwu. The thing about Uwu is that the enjoyment for me in Uwu personally came from the experience of learning it, from going through. So watching it, like reading a guide for Uwu, like pulling up the game facts for it and just getting the cheat codes, like it's not the same.
It's not in the same fight.
It's not the same fight. The experience of Uwu, just like going through it and getting bamboozled after bamboozle, that's where like the fun in the fight came for me.
And I think that's an interesting way to develop fights too, is that you make them puzzle fights that, you know, take execution, but there's a huge emphasis on the puzzle for the people who want a difficult fight to progress through when they're first going through it, the really hardcore players and everything else. But everyone that's not really at that level still has something difficult to do, but it's a little bit easier. It kind of curves it a little bit. So, I mean, do you guys want to see puzzle-style development in some of these fights? Or do you feel
I'll tell you one thing. It made it really fun to prog. It made for a very boring farm experience.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Ultimate Weapon. I'm gonna pose this question for anybody in the chat also who clears Ultimate Weapon regularly. Has that been like a fun farm cycle for anybody? Because
I had a lot of fun farming it.
Okay.
Okay.
But I have a lot of fun doing things that people normally don't have fun doing, like going in a party
that's fair.
finder.
That's
and,
fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I loved it. I just really like
feel
playing
like all
the
the
game,
fun,
so.
all the fun was in solving for me personally. So I guess I should just speak personally. Like all the fun for me was in solving it.
We plagiarize all our strats. Like, we let other people solve it. We didn't raid enough to take part in like that type of progression, but we also wanted to kill it as fast as we could. So it's like, hey, videos are out. Let's scour for details, right? Like that was my prog experience. So it's completely different from your guys's.
Right.
Let's compare it to farming UCOB. How would you feel between farming Uwu and farming UCOB?
Well, Bach doesn't know.
I have no idea.
I say this for like Layla or anyone in the chat.
Okay,
like, how do you feel?
I liked farming UCOB more than I liked farming Ultima. But I will say that UCOB had its own problems in farm for different reasons, and that it was just sort of an exhausting thing to farm repeatedly. Like doing it once a week, you know, was probably fine. But when we started like messing around with like trying to speed run it and stuff, you know, when we were preparing for Sigmascape, that became like exhausting, just because the fight is so long. Yeah, Ultimate Weapon is arbitrarily long, which I kind of like what they did. I don't think they can do this for every fight, but Ultimate Weapon is really long, but not for the same reasons the UCOB is. It's like a 19. It's a long progression cycle in that you have this 7 minutes of progression in front of what you actually have to do to solve the fight that you progress through, and then you realize, oh, we don't have to do any of that. So then you backtrack and you start over, and then you progress through a real version of the 15-minute fight. So I thought that was like a really cool answer to, hey, we can make this fight quote unquote longer than 15 minutes or 14 minutes without actually having it be longer than 14 minutes once you've actually solved the fight. I lost my train of thought of what I was actually talking about, but I kind of went on a
the farming.
the farming thing. Yeah, the farming thing. So I think personally, and I guess this is very subjective, I just preferred farming UCOB over farming Ultima.
I mean, this is also talking about repeatable content within Final Fantasy XIV for raiders. How happy are we coming back and doing the same fight over and over again? And if the fights are more enjoyable to do it the second time, is that good? I'm assuming it is. But that's kind of a challenge, right? You kind of get bored of doing the same thing over and over again, especially when you already have all the answers to it. You're just trying to perfect it. And I think a lot of people who are in the mid-core community and everything else, it's not repeating it, it's just clearing it. And they're done.
That's fair. But that is fair. They may design ultimates under the pretext of this is not something you're going to be doing repeatedly. And if that's the case, then Square Enix, I need more things to do.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, then it is an enjoyable experience for that one clear.
Yeah. And I mean,
probably more so with Ultimate Weapon.
Yeah. And we have been going for 3 hours and 22 minutes. I'm going to try to end this before 4 hours because I'm already going to be late for my work tonight. But I do want to kind of talk a little bit about the just life of raiders and how it was in previous expansions and how it is now after you clear content. What are you guys doing? That's
what he's doing right now.
Fold, what are you doing? You're playing.
New mail has arrived.
Yeah, new mail has arrived. You're playing Maple Story 2. But like it's kind of most raiders overall, and I mean I want everybody in the chat to tell me if you're a casual raider, if you're a mid-core raider, you guys are done with raiding. Right now, if they do not release another ultimate or another tier, you guys are done until the next expansion. I mean, what's keeping you guys in the game to keep playing? What's missing? What do you guys need? Is it just adding in more things to progress towards, like making stronger equipment, like another relic grind that's not Eureka?
Just one thing, man. It just needs one thing.
Okay.
Mythic Plus.
Mythic Plus.
Needs Mythic Plus.
Light party content.
That's all
Okay.
it needs. I'm telling you guys, it needs Mythic Plus.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I'm in like a unique situation, but like I still like doing raids even for no reward. I'll still do it.
Blasphemy. How dare you?
It's like no, it's
Just
no,
giving you shit.
I know, but on it, like, but seriously though, like I don't know, just going back in, 0 chest, 1 chest, whatever. Just join whatever party you can find, or maybe help out some friends if you're not playing, right? But playing on a different job, relearning that fight on a different job, or maybe different strategies, or just playing with different people, right? And not just your static, once a week raid log, right? Like, I don't know. I just have a really enjoyable time just raiding. I don't know if this is a mystery to you guys.
I have a
this is
theory
big
for it,
secret,
Buck. I have a theory.
I don't know if you know.
for
Okay, I don't know if you know this about me, but I really like playing Final Fantasy 14.
I gotcha. But just real quick, just so people know, not a lot of people know what Mythic Plus is. Layla or Fold, do you guys want to explain it to everybody?
I mean, it's just repeatable dungeon-based. It's small party content, so you don't need a full raid group for it. That's repeatable, and then it has a reward that incentivizes you to want to repeat it. That's really what it is. Mythic Plus specifically in WoW is they take pre-existing dungeons, and you have a keystone that unlocks higher levels of those dungeons, and based on the level of the keystone, it scales the mob's HPs and health. And in addition to that, you also have weird little affixes, like if you're familiar with Diablo 3, imagine adding like little Diablo 3 style affixes to the mobs. And you have to, if you do it in a timer, and you have to complete it in a set amount of time to progress or get the maximum amount of reward that you can. It's an endlessly scaling set of content, so you're never going to be without a way to progress through it. You can take the keystones as high as you want. And basically what Fold and I have been preaching for many, many, many months, over a year at this point, is just some light party content that is worth repeating, that is a way that feels substantiary in terms of our character's progression. Just something to do that somehow progresses our character. It could be as simple as give us light party content using the already pre-existing dungeons, scale them up so they're harder, and maybe depending on how hard you do them, you get a pink item of some eye level that has randomly generated stats on it. I'm not talking like mined on a warrior axe, but I'm talking like, it has a stat budget and the stats are allocated, in like a random way, and make that as a reward for doing this content. Have some sort of side-based character progression that incentivizes the player to be doing repeatable content. Because I feel like that's a big thing missing, unless you're a masochist like Bach and loves joining party finders and clearing the same 4 fights.
I'm not
every
saying
week.
I wouldn't love that idea either.
I think that there is a way for the Bach Choys to get their enjoyment by playing other jobs and being, because what Bach likes to do is he clearly likes to play with other people, see other people's play styles. He likes to learn the other jobs and learn how they, perform in fights, and that's all very good, and that's what makes a very good player.
Yeah.
And that will make him a good player, and make him a better player going forward, like in the future of the game. Like, everybody should be wanting to do that, but not everybody wants to do the same 4 fights. That's, to me, the big problem.
Exactly. It's
you can do all that issue, in other content.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if even if it was something as simple as, like, you remember the light farm? Let's say they had Mythic Plus dungeons available, and the higher you do the plus, like if you did like a +10, you'd get even more light. Like even something as basic as that would incentivize, it would speed up your grind. You know, it would be actual difficult content.
Yeah.
So like, even something as basic as light farming, I would be on board for.
Yeah, I mean, and if a lot of people have made the argument too, is that now they would have to, you know, balance that content in ways that when the scaling gets to a certain point, it's going to be wonky. It doesn't matter if it's wonky or...
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. It could be just ridiculously screwed up and not balanced and unfair. Whatever. It's just another level of difficulty for that dungeon. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Look, I'm gonna level with you, and this is a little too wow probably for the talk, but Legion class design in WoW was not balanced around Mythic Plus almost at any point. It is only until BFA that they've started balancing classes for their performance in Mythic Plus, because they're trying to make it. They're trying to make it esports. That's what they're trying to do.
I love how you guys, by the way, live by race car drivers.
You can hear that? What the fuck?
Yeah, I just I hear it every once in a while, and I'm like, I don't.
Man.
It's okay. It's not
This thing needs a push to talk, but anyway.
Yeah, I know.
No, you have to it's like a toggle to talk. It's really
Yeah.
nice. But yeah, and everyone enjoyed Legion Mythic Plus. Like, it didn't matter that there were certain things that were just vastly superior to others. Look, we play a video game where you can have every single job leveled on one character. If something is broken, and it's so broken that it's stopping your enjoyment of content, just level it and play it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm pretty down for that. So.
Oh, people bitch about job balance so much. Jobs have never been this balanced. Could you hear that in the background?
Yeah, I
But
can, but it's okay.
Oh.
I also agree with what Bach just said. Class balance in Stormblood, with the exception of a few outliers, I think probably recent astrologian changes and the warrior wasn't really a balance issue; it was a design issue. But I'd say halfway through Stormblood, warrior was a bit overpowered. But overall, when you compare it to the previous expansions, we have more jobs viable in a hardcore raiding scenario than ever, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. So getting into kind of the last 30 minutes of this, we don't really have to talk about Stormblood fights in general. We can talk about them, because it's really just 12 fights. We don't have to talk about them in detail unless we really want to get into it. I do want to talk about kind of what we have hit it a little bit too, but the development cycle and what we're driving forward towards. Going
Frosty, we're not going to talk about PvP, man. Just let it go.
How there should be open world PvP in Eureka, and that would make it 10 times better. But no, I was joking. I think that if we start going into the raid's next tier or next expansion, what do we need to see to be content with the raiding scene?
Well, I'll give you my wish list. I want more identities in raids. I want, if I'm being honest, and I know that I don't have a lot of time to express why, but I would prefer if we just go back to making the raid tiers a bit more difficult, requiring people to, if they want to see the content and they see the story, require a bit more effort, and just axe the Ultimate series. And I know that's probably heresy, and people don't understand why I'm saying that. But I think the division of resources and the division of talent is a bit counterproductive to what I want to see in their game. I think just going all in on Savage and making Savage as good as can be is probably what I want to see going forward. That being said, I do really appreciate that they went and made Ultimate for the 29 people that actually cared about it. Other than that,
I mean, I have to agree. I have to just completely agree that Square Enix needs to raise its expectations of what its players can do.
Mm-hmm. As a counterpoint to that, well, not so much a counterpoint, just to kind of add to that, but this game does absolutely nothing to prepare its own people for raid content, right? It does absolutely nothing. Like, where did you learn to raid, right? If, you know,
Through trial and error.
most people just like, trial and error. There are resources on the internet, other players, right? But the game does nothing. And
Official forums, Bok Choy forum posts.
Yeah.
Sure. but I think that if the game, or if SE wants raid content to be more difficult, or if we want it to be more difficult, they should also play a part in facilitating players for getting into raiding, knowing what to do, what to practice, and just better tools for that, right?
I mean, they're just against making raiding like the core part of their game, I feel like.
I'm kind of against that a little bit, Buck. I don't feel like we should hold people's hands going into the raid scene. They should know basics. I mean, say Grandma wants to go and raid. Grandma just needs to know that she needs to hold enemy or whatever. They need to hold aggro. They need to.
Linda played great in Final Coil.
Yeah.
Look, normal should be that.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Normal can be that.
Normal should be. I personally would like to see normal closer to where Savage is, and then Savage
absolutely.
to be a much more difficult, not maybe ultimate level, but somewhere getting closer to it. I mean, if we make normal this walkthrough, we're not giving people something to look to improve themselves for, right? I feel like giving them the bait of a decent story, something else in the game. We should be able to expect this of just normal players of an MMO to try to be better at their job to clear something. And with what Savage is right now, it doesn't require any meta. It doesn't require anything except for knowing the basics of raiding. Right?
I would agree with that. I would actually. That's a very hot take, Frosty, but I would actually agree with it. Yeah.
You know, as far as the difficulty goes for Savage, like obviously I'd like it to be harder than it is now, but I don't care that much as long as it's fun. I don't care that much. That, you know, I do want it to be harder, but if it's not, that's fine as long as it's fun.
I mean, but you got to put that value in there, right? Fun also comes with things having a challenge to it and feeling rewarded from the
absolutely.
challenge, right?
So, and this is where we come full circle. We're back to the Realm Reborn discussion of people. Are people going to be more fulfilled when things are literally handed to them, or when they have to work a little bit harder for them? And I guess I'm of the mindset that they'll find more fulfillment and therefore have more fun if they have to work a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so, but like, I personally felt that Final Coil was easier than Second Coil. I think most people agree, right?
100%.
Yeah.
But I found that Final Coil was still more fun to do.
Oh, you're crazy.
That's just I thought it was.
You're actually objectively wrong. There's no opinion here, actually.
No, there's a.
So
I
so
fought
I,
a lot of Final Coil, man. Oh my god. When the lockout was removed, okay, so having the lockout removed kind of like makes it more enjoyable too, I think, from what boxing. So like, I know personally I don't really care about farming or like doing the fights until the lockouts removed, because there's like you get gear for your alts, you know, and you're also learning on your alts. So that's one thing that comes to mind when.
Yeah, possibly, but I just think that even though challenge is a huge ingredient for fun to me, it's not the only ingredient. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, make fights more enjoyable by giving them more interesting mechanics and things that make us just overall enjoy it as a fight instead of just being difficult. You have fun executing what you have to do to clear the fight.
Some things that might be harder may not also be enjoyable, though. You know, it's
like, well, DPS checks I would think would be a clear sign of that too. I mean, you feel achieved at the end for hitting that check, but you don't feel like there's not really much more enjoyment besides hitting your OGCs and GCDs at the right time, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
So going forward, sorry, and we got Layla's thought on this, and I went off in this whole tangent. I don't even remember what started it, to be honest with you.
I don't remember our show topic, to be honest.
Yeah, we're just like, why do you have show topics? We just talk about
What's
rating.
the topic about? Is it Aura?
Oh,
Frosty's fireside chat.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. Bach, going forward into the next expansion, what you're wanting to see within the raiding scene overall, within the raids, within whatever you might be most interested in, what do you want to see happen within this next expansion?
I like to look at things through like kind of like a game designer perspective. I'm by no means a game designer, but I just like that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to see more creative mechanics and more unique mechanics. Alphascape, there's a lot of recycled mechanics, like different names for the same fucking mechanics. It's just like larboard wave cannon. This is just left laser sword or right laser sword, right? And then it's like, okay, Panto, this is new. No, it's not. It's just the stupid flamethrower from it's Heaven's fault. It's almost the same thing. You run around. I mean, there's nothing new in that fight. I guess the fists are new, and then you look at 12. Hello World is just what's it called? Temporal stasis with different names for the debuffs.
The time
right?
stop.
Yeah, instead of defamation, everyone still calls it defamation. It's called
it's literally called defamations in like every prog I've ever watched.
Yeah,
We're
sure.
talking about
Yeah.
We need to talk about 10 if we're going to talk about recycling.
Oh,
The
10,
king,
10
the
is
king of 10.
it's like
We haven't talked about it. The
10
king of
is
recycling.
10
Yeah.
is like a glorified primal.
Yeah.
It even recycles the music.
Yeah. So we need to see less recycled content
Okay, yeah.
in the end game raids. I mean, bring them down to like dungeons, bring them down to like other stuff that we are okay with them being in there. Like, oh, this is a nice shout out to this boss, but giving us the core content we care about being something we've seen already, doing the exact same stuff we've seen already, is not enjoyable.
Yeah, see, like the whole fight can't be all new mechanics. That's just not realistic. There's going to be some variation of like stack, spread, go find your partner, or that shit. Go to your cardinal or whatever, right? There's going to be some variation of that, but stuff like Animal Farm in like that's memorable. It's like, oh, remember Animal Farm? Remember when people would turn into a pig when they're supposed to be a frog? That was hilarious, or whatever, right? And it's like, oh, do you remember? Oh my god,
It's okay. I can still hear you and understand you.
It's just white noise at this point.
Yeah, it's white noise.
Just stuff like that, right? Like even 24-mans have like unique mechanics, and then you look at like some of the fights in this tier, like 10 specifically 10. It's just like, what are you gonna remember when you look back on 10?
Nidhogg.
Like a Spyro strat, I guess. I have no idea. And then I think 11 is like totally overrated. Like I guess it's fun to do, but all the mechanics are just like rehashed, man.
I would love to see a fight in the new expansion that doesn't have all the basic, like 14 mechanics, like stack up, spread out. Like I would love to see some type of like new, just entirely new mechanics.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like if they're they have those gauges, right? Those they have those boss gauges. Maybe you could do something with that, some kind of interaction with that. But like all the basic mechanics, they're so reused. They've been here for years now, and they're just constantly recycled.
One thing we didn't talk about is the introduction of raid AoE indicators, AoE markers.
Yeah.
That like really, really, really made the mechanic recycling feel more prevalent than maybe it might have if they didn't exist. So that everyone, the quintessential like raid marker for a stack-based mechanic is a Dragon's Rage from Thornton, because that's where where the marker first appeared. And it's like everyone ever since Thornton has always called that stack marker a Dragon's Rage. Well, at least everybody I play with. And, I wonder, like, if you take away those markers, are the mechanics more interesting, less interesting, or the exact same?
Same to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't feel
Like,
too much.
it might
of a
be the
difference.
same to me, but at the same time, the dance seems just like for some reason in my brain, the dance seems more interesting when you take away a marker that's telling you how to do the dance. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. But I'm okay with like the whole stack and spread and stuff. I think every fight should have some unique mechanic that makes it memorable. That's all I ask.
Sure, that's fair.
I mean,
think that's all I ask. I think this whole expansion, they've been less creative than they were in Heavensward.
mm-hmm.
I would agree.
And to go back to your point, Layla, you're looking at the difference between A11 normal and A11S with markers, right? Because I mean, that was one of the difficulty increases, is that they took away some of the indicators.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. Sure, it's an example of what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's certain ones. Stack doesn't mean as much to me because, I mean, it does make it super clear, but once you're standing on a person, you're in the right position. But if it was like an AoE, and I'm like, I think I'm far enough away, you edge more back than maybe you would if you saw the line. And so it's kind of like, it adds some sort of fear, slight excitement, even if it's like really small. There's something there. And I feel like that is kind of important to make sure that we don't have things too apparent.
I have an amendment of things that I would look for. I would want more in 5.0, less indicators.
Okay, there you go. Okay, Fold, is there anything else that we haven't said so far that you just want to add and you're like, I hope they do this going into the next expansion?
I want to see, like we talked about, I want to see less of the repeating mechanics. I want to see something unique. Either it be percentage based at like 30% or something, but having it become a victory lap is just kind of it takes away the enjoyment of the fight. It takes away the thrill of the fight, because you kind of just like, you get through the 50% push or whatever, and you're like, hey, we're good as long as we don't mess up, you know?
Yeah.
Outside of that, I think everything has been covered that I'm on board with.
Yeah, I think that we hit it pretty hard today. There's still more that we could talk about. We could probably go on for another day. But
same time tomorrow, right?
Yeah, same time tomorrow. We'll just do it again. Do it again.
Legal story stuff to do.
Yeah, I don't have a question sheet for everybody. I don't feel like we have time to justify that. We were a little bit interactive, with the chat. We kind of talked and went over some of the points there too. But going into a 4-hour show, we're kind of cutting it. We're cutting it close.
It's been 3 hours and 45 minutes, Frosty. You still got time, dude.
You're right. Oh, jeez. Maybe this makes up for me not doing like the marathon for the 50th episode, but we'll get it. One thing that I want to say, this is kind of the biggest thing. One of the most interesting things about this show so far, is I started MogTalk like 3.5 years ago, a long time ago. I started MogTalk up, and it's, one of the first guests that I tried to ask on the show before I asked Layla on the show was Fold. And I was like, Fold, do you want to come on the show and talk about some stuff?
I just duck my head.
He ducked the fucking way out, and he's like, Layla's kind of our guy for that. So I don't regret that. I love Layla a lot.
This, yeah. The only reason I'm even here is because Fold ducked.
Yeah, because he ducked out of it completely.
3 years ago.
And no, Layla is wonderful, and I think that he's one of my favorite people, along with Bach as well, of course. But when we were talking about getting Fold on the show, it was a big deal that you came on, even though it was kind of like a little bit after we started. But it was amazing to have you come on here, and I think that the fact that we had a lot of serious conversation that I did not expect to have, I'm going to be honest with you, Fold. I'm going to be honest. I've had you followed for so long, and I forget what picture of what penis it was. But I hit the... Oh, it wasn't Thanos. It was after that somewhere. I dealt with that.
There's another one?
There was another one of something, and I was just like, all right, hit the drop down, unfollow. The thing is, it doesn't matter because other people I follow just retweet the fucking thing you said. So it doesn't matter. I still see it. But I appreciate you coming on and being having a great conversation with us.
I wanted to put on. I wanted it to be a surprise, you know. Wink, wink. I wanted to. Well, also I saw Kiri. He did that meme. Did you see the?
He say that? Yeah.
That forced my hand.
So good, dude.
I had no choice after Kiri.
That was so good, dude.
I just had to come on at that point.
Oh my god.
But yeah, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, it was awesome having you.
Everybody only gets to see one side of Fold, dude. Because I've rated with Fold since 2013, 14, something like I think like 2013. Mm-hmm. And I've seen the all sides of Fold. And you guys only get to see the shit post, but he actually has a lot of good insight about the game. So I knew that getting him on would be a good idea.
Sometimes I have a brain cell.
Yeah. Not lately, but
you should accept more invites, Fold.
Right.
I appreciate you very much. You did a wonderful job here. But we probably should go through all the shouts and everything. Fold, do you want to do any shout outs to anyone?
Shout out to Cramp. Shout out to Serena. It's my waifu. And shout out to Kiri. I wouldn't be on the show if you didn't post that. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anyone else.
Have you got any mail?
Do you have any what?
Do you have any mail?
Mail? No, not yet. No, it comes 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Every 10 minutes, but it's gonna probably about 1 minute then.
It's close.
Yeah, it's close.
Okay.
And Bach too, man. I love you, dude. You're one of my favorite people in the world.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, I'm glad I got you on the show here. I know it was funny because I asked you, I was like, hey, you want to come on the show? And you're like, some Saturdays, I'm like, let's just do it this Saturday. You're like, all right. And it just worked out.
That was perfect, actually.
Yeah, I was afraid I wasn't going to get you on, but you always have tons of insight. And you're such a value to the community, especially in the value that you give to Reddit and saving a lot of the nonsense that happens there.
I do want to make a shout out because Coldy.
Yes.
Okay, so when I joined this call, I was running dungeons with Coldy's crew, and I said, "Hey, I need to get on this MogTalk." So shout outs to Coldy.
Nice.
I just cucked their dungeon group to get on this show.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Dude, I miss Coldy.
Oh. Okay. Sorry, Buck. Before Fold rudely interrupted, your last part here. Buck, is there any shout outs or anything that you'd like to do?
Shout outs?
Yeah.
My static, man.
Always.
The reason I play this game. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, the dudes in my static. Also, we had a couple guys fill in for us because we had 2 people who wanted to do like day 1 prog, and 6 people who couldn't. So then we're just like, well, why don't we just split up for like the first few weeks, and then we'll just like, you guys could like rejoin us like after. So we'll just recruit some temps, and we'll tell them straight up, like we'll just be like, yeah, we're gonna clear with you, and then after that, no more commitments. So we actually picked up two reps as well. So they're awesome. I mean, they actually, we're only gonna do 1 week, but we ended up doing 4. But yeah, shout outs to Eureka and SB for filling in for us.
I thought you meant the actual.
We're absent, so shout outs to them as well.
Nice. I thought you were actually talking about the game mode, and I was confused by that. But yeah, man, I look forward to. I'm sad you're not coming to FanFest. I really am, but I understand, and we'll have our time. We'll have our time one day.
Yeah, man, one of these days.
Layla, man, you're amazing. I'm so glad you came on today. I'm glad we got a good topic that I think everybody here definitely wanted to talk about. And your insights always, of course, valued.
Drag me out of retirement for this one.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of let NA down, but you know what? Everybody can get it.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Show's over.
Yeah. Good time. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on, and even though it may be like 8-month stint before we start seeing the next raid, and you kind of running around in that too. But thank you for coming on, dude. And is there any other
Always
shoutouts?
pleasure, dude.
Shouts.
Yes. Shout out to 2.1 Warrior God Choy for making me making me the warrior I am today.
That's
Shout
a
out
lot.
to the Bach Strat turned 13.
I didn't even invent that.
We always wondered. So we always wondered. Did you ever like get wind of everyone just calling that the Bach?
Oh, dude, I found out in the weirdest way.
Yeah.
Okay, I was actually I stopped playing Final Fantasy and I was playing Blade and Soul beta, and some guy was like, "Are you Bok Choy from Final Fantasy 14?" I'm like,
nice.
"Yeah." I'm surprised this guy recognized.
Like,
it
I love your
from the game.
Earthshaker strat.
And he goes, "Your Earthshaker strat, your Earthshaker strat costs us many hours in wipes."
Oh my god!
And I'm like, "Mine." He's like, "Yeah." Did you know everyone in Gilgamesh calls it the Bok Choy? And it's I'm like, we don't even in our static we call it the Jethrid Shuffle because Jeth was the person who came up with it. I just published the video on like YouTube.
That's so funny.
So I
man.
got all the credit for it, and everyone calls it the Bok Choy. But in our own static, we called it the Jethrid Shuffle. So to this
That's
day,
not
we
nearly
still-
as cool as the Bach.
Yeah.
It was always called the Bach.
Oh, I make a point to call it that around Jeth, just to piss him off.
Yeah. So shout out to memes. I think shout out to Frosty obviously for putting together a fun show today. I think all of us 3 guests probably really enjoyed our time. I know I did.
Yeah, dude.
Always fun to shoot the shit about rating.
Of course.
And anytime you want to have Fold back on, let me know, and I'll berate him for the required 24 hours it requires.
Okay.
Get Kiri too.
Yeah, you gotta like Kirino too.
Yeah. The next MogTalk we'll have together will be unrecorded live edition at FanFest where we just sit around and drink.
Oh, I'm down.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yep. Guys, thank you for coming on. Just as well for me. I really loved having you all on. I thank you everybody that was watching the show today. Thank you Andre Kane who lets us use his music for the intro and the outro. And also thank you Blazana for the layout that we have modified multiple times in the last 3 or 4 years. And all the mods in chat that don't ever have to do anything because everybody watching the show are extremely good people who don't do horrible things in chat. And again, guys, I don't know when the next MogTalk will be, if I'm going to have one before FanFest. We may have one that's a pre-FanFest show. We may have one that's an after FanFest show. We'll see how that works out. It just depends on my schedule. I have been going through lots of different things in my own life. Got married 2 weeks ago. I am back in school. I'm working. I'm doing tons of stuff. So it's very, very active for me outside of Final Fantasy 14. Guys,
Hold on. Can we get some hands in the chat for Married Man Frosty, by the way? Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Frosty.
I did it. It only took me 7 years. But besides, and by the way, you guys would have loved it there. If I wasn't, I would have streamed it if it didn't feel so cringy to do so. I would have loved to have you guys all watch there. We had Final Fantasy music. The victory theme on our way away from the ceremony. We had Cowboy Bebop theme on the way to the ceremony. We had the Papaya song on our first grand entrance going in before we start dancing to a Spirited Away song. Mario Party in the background. It was the best.
Yeah, that sounds nerdy as shit.
And an open bar of like $2,000 worth of alcohol between like only a handful of people. So we were just drinking it up and going crazy. It was pretty amazing. I loved it. Kurt, my wife in chat tells me we would have not streamed it. So
Shout out to Kerr.
Shout out to Kurt for sure. But guys, yeah, it's been crazy. Also, at FanFest, if you guys don't know, I know a lot of people watching the show are very focused on raiding and don't really mess in the PvP scene. But I will be doing the shoutcasting officially on stage at FanFest for the FRC, which is the Feast Regional Championship. And we'll be doing that I don't know if the time's released for it. So when that's happening over there at FanFest, so please, it's the first time I've been on stage shoutcasting. So if you guys want to support me, just be there, and when you see me, be like, ah, or whatever you do when you are happy about someone being on stage. It would mean a lot. But guys, that all being said, thank you very much for coming by today. We'll have this posted. Hopefully I can get it posted up tomorrow. Have a wonderful night, and guys, be good, keep cool, stay frosty. Bye.
He said the thing.
Bye.
I said it. Fold, say bye.
Bye.
Perfect. And we are